into the capital markets to raise more money, right? Because they're getting to the point where it's hard to manage the company. And so they either got to go to the credit markets, which risks their rating, or they got to go to the equity markets, and equity investors hate dilution. And so Boeing just can't let it drag on because of that. And those investors, credit and equity, are going to want to know what the outcome's going to be from that strike, probably before they seal a deal. So I think it can't go months.
Why can't Boeing just flip a switch and ramp up production?
Because this is a custom manufactured product, right? I mean, people forget that, right? An auto plant is a 400,000 unit a year plant. You have multiple suppliers for everything you put in that plant. So if one supplier fails, you go get the other supplier to bring you more. Everything is automated to the max to make sure that the employee that puts that auto together doesn't do it wrong. You build what? If Boeing got to 40 a month on the 737, their biggest product would be a 480 unit product. It is custom manufacturing. So you need really skilled labor. And that's probably why the IAM deserves these increases, right? These are not, they don't go into idiot-proof jobs every day. They go into critical jobs where you need skills. And so that's why I think it's hard to flip the switch. And it's all across the aerospace supply chain. It's in the suppliers as well, and that's why you don't flip a switch and just go to higher rates.
Well, but as the industry is dealing with overcapacity anyway, is it okay that Boeing's production rate, falls?
So I would say that, what we saw from second quarter U.S. and European airline earnings was that we're not in a shortage of airplanes. We're perhaps in a little bit of a surplus, right? I don't think it's okay for Boeing to shut down the factory for an extended period of time at all, right? Because it's going to mean a lot more market share for Airbus. And if you are an airline that wants to go to the next generation airplane, better fuel burn airplane, sooner or later people will get out of the queue at Boeing and go, let me get into the queue at Airbus because Boeing just can't get their act together, right? So I don't think there's any reason for them to feel good if they're not building airplanes.
All right, there we go. Boeing, it's just a story that keeps on giving.
I love George in the studio. This is awesome.
It takes a cocktail party to get him up here. But anyway, George Ferguson, Senior Aerospace, Defense, and Airlines Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Giving us the latest on Boeing. I guess we're going to hear very shortly about whether they're going to have a strike there at Boeing, as George was just mentioning. It's really a strike that this company at this time cannot really bear right now because they need to kind of crank up production, get the cash flow that this company needs, and get back to a growth trajectory here. I'm just looking at the stock. It's up 0.5% today, but it's down 38% year to date. It's got a market cap just about $100 billion. So this is a significant company. S&P 500, it is up 9 points here today. The NASDAQ up 52 points. That's 0.3%. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy, what is it? Thursday. Happy Thursday, everybody. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. The top news over in Europe right now, one of the top news here is UniCredit. It has a 9% stake now in Commerce Bank. UniCredit stock is up almost 3% on the day. UniCredit CEO Andrea Orcel said that a full takeover of Commerce Bank is still an option. Orcel spoke exclusively with Bloomberg's Francine Locke, while he said, look, all options are on the table.
We want the flexibility. Flexibility because as a private investor at the moment, we may go up, we may go down, and we may combine. All the options are on the table.
Lento Tang joins us now, bank analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Lento, how do you think this plays out?
Hi. I think this is maybe a little bit surprised, but not as much as people would have thought, because for two reasons. UniCredit has a really strong excess capital position, and also Andrea also coming from an investment banking background. So these two combination makes it quite obvious that the M&A is coming. We just didn't know when and what is the target. And now it plays out, and you can see the market reaction quite positively compared with BBVA, the takeover bid on Sabadell not too long ago. Very different reactions. So people kind of expect it to come.
Well, I mean, Lento, I've been listening to European bank analysts for decades bemoan the fact that while the American banks are able to consolidate and become these big global banks, the European banks aren't allowed to do cross-border M&A. Mm-hmm. What are the regulators saying about this deal?
I think regulatory risk is still there, but I think given what we've seen on the BBVA Sabadell deal, the ECB and probably the local competition authorities are not going to block it. That's my opinion. On ECB, the most thing they care about is capital solvency position, and UniCredit has a really strong position on that point. On the competition point, Germany is one of the lowest concentrated markets for banking in Europe. So I don't see a high risk coming from there as well. For this deal, I think the biggest risk is probably the politics. We've already seen news about the union opposing the deal. But other than that, I don't see a lot of risk.
What are some of the other options that Andrea Orcel might have been talking about? He says all options are on the table. What are some of those other options?
I mean, if the deal didn't happen, then it will probably go back to the original capital distribution, which is also very attractive. We estimate it's roughly about 27 billion capital distribution between 2022 to 2024 to 26. So this is still very appealing for investors. So the capital position just gives it a lot of options. So it as also said in an interview earlier today that he can take his time. He's not hurrying to make any decisions because he can find the right price to do the right thing.
So is this going to unleash a wave of cross-border European bank M&A?
If this deal goes through, I think so, yes. Because this is something a lot of people are expecting, including us banking analysts. Mm-hmm. It will be very exciting times. The main reason for that is just because the interest rate is falling down and banks need to find new revenue drivers, and this is the perfect timing.
But I still don't understand what has changed. Why is this deal possible today when I would say a year ago it was impossible? Has something changed regulatory-wise, or just a feeling within the European Union?
Yeah, I think for UniCredit, well, in this case, the most important thing that's changed is the price. UniCredit has been trading quite at heavy discount. I mean, arguably, maybe you can argue it's still due, but the price to book now is right to 1. It's a much better level than compared with a year ago, and I think that is one of the main hurdles that also didn't make a move earlier is because the price for UniCredit is just too low. So it makes more sense to do share buybacks. but now it's more balanced. So it can weigh its options more carefully now.
All right, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Lento Tang, Bloomberg Intelligence Bank Analyst, looking at UniCredit and that commerce takeover as we kind of wait for any trigger. And if that really actually means more loans and more growth, like that's really what Europe eventually, at the end of the day, winds up meaning. So I know where Paul was yesterday. He was watching some Yankees.
Yankee baseball.
Oh, yeah.
And they won. Yesterday beat the Royals. So it was great to be up in the Bronx.
And there was wasn't there like a home run that was really awesome that happened?
Well, Juan Soto, who's just phenomenal, he had a big blast. But they won it in the bottom of the 11th inning on kind of a walk-off kind of hit. So it's pretty cool there.
Ah, okay. There we go. See, that's
Yeah.
what Paul does. What was I? I was in bed by 9. Look at that. Speaking of the Yankees, don't miss New York Yankees Hall of Fame shortstop Derek Jeter and Untuckit founder Chris Riccobano on Bloomberg Business Week discussing their athletic wear collaboration greatness wins. That's going to be fantastic. You can find it on Bloomberg Radio and TV and on YouTube at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. All right, coming up in the next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence, we got a lot more for you here. Okay, I'm going to make Paul talk about SAF. SAF is sustainable aviation fuel, but it's actually really cool because you can just put that in a tank and you're good to go. The problem is supply, and we're going to talk to a supplier. Todd Broman, a CEO of Cattlemount Specialty Products, will be joining us. Plus, David Schwartz, co-principal and CEO of Slate on affordable or lack of affordable housing right here in New York City. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the news that you need in business, economics, and finance. We have a great hour lined up for you. We're going to get you caught up to date on the stock market. Plus, Todd Broman is CEO at Cattlemount Specialty Products on sustainable aviation fuel. You can just kind of stick it in a regular engine and go, but that supply is really the issue. Plus, David Schwartz, co-principal and CEO of Slate, will be joining us on affordable housing in New York City and congestion pricing, apparently. Where's John Tucker when you need him?
Exactly.
All right, and also Barry Ritholtz, the man himself, founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management and host of Masters in Business, will be joining us on what he's liking right now in the market. But let's get you caught up here. Here's a Biz Flash with Charlie Peller.
All right, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We've got the S&P in the red right now. Lower a little change, 55.51, down 2 points. A drop there of just under 0.1%. This Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors who are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn more. S&P struggling for direction right now, just turning higher, barely up less than half a point, struggling to gain much traction after a 3-day rally. We've got the Dow down 101 now, down 0.2%. NASDAQ up 35, a gain there of 0.2%. 10-year at 3.68% with a 2-year that's yielding 3.66%. Gold is surging 1.6%, up $41 the ounce now to $25.52. West Texas Intermediate crude up again today, up another 2.7%, 69.16 on WTI. Brent crude higher by 2.3%, now back above $72 a barrel of Brent at 72.24. So it is a mixed day for the U.S. stock market. Mohamed Al-Arian, the Queens College Cambridge president and Bloomberg opinion columnist, says we should be expecting a quarter-point Fed cut next week because they are being overreactive.
We won't get dramatic series of 50s, but we will be measured for the wrong reason. We'll be measured because the Fed will remain overreactive, meaning it will be too data dependent. I think the key issue about Greenspan, Bernanke, and Yellen, when they were willing to lean forward and take a view of the economy. Chair Powell is not there yet.
Mohammed Al-Arian speaking with Bloomberg's Tom Keene and our Paul Sweeney earlier today on Bloomberg Surveillance. Members of Boeing's largest union vote today on the first comprehensive labor contract in 16 years. Boeing shares right now little changed, up just under 0.1%. Delta Airlines expects its full-year profit to be at or above the midpoint of its prior guidance. Delta now higher by 0.5%. And Alaska Air Group has boosted its outlook for third quarter profit on strong summer demand. Alaska up by 1.3%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pell, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City, streaming live on YouTube as well. And then for our friends in San Francisco, starting October 1st, the place to listen to us in the Bay Area is on the Bloomberg Business app. It works seamlessly in your car with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Make the switch today, because come October 1st, Bloomberg Radio is streaming directly to your phone. The Bay Area's new home for Bloomberg Radio is the Bloomberg Business app. Download it for free at the Apple App Store or on Google Play. And as Charlie was just reporting, kind of some red and green on the screen here. Let's check in with Nora Melinda. She covers the equity markets for Bloomberg News. She is in our New York studio. Nora, what are you looking at this hour?
Well, let's take a look at Warner Brothers Discovery. That's ticker WBD. And I'm also looking at Charter Communications, ticker CHTR. But if we're looking at Warner Brothers, this is some news that came out saying that its early renewal pact with Charter Communications was renewed a bit earlier than expected. And so we did see some news, a research report from Bloomberg Intelligence. They're saying that this is good news for Warner Brothers Discovery because, of course, it's really been riddled with concerns about the loss of its NBA rights that's starting with the 2025 season. And Charter actually brings in around a little bit below $2 billion, or 17 to 18% of Warner Brothers Discovery's annual affiliate fees. But, you know, when we think about this stock on a broader scale, shares are pretty low. I mean, they're trading around $7.50, which is down 70% from their 2022 high. So, I mean, this slight pop, we'll see how it trickles out. But, I mean, it's a pretty depressed stock when we look at it.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, people are really wondering what's the future of Warner Brothers Discovery going against some of these big technology-driven media companies. And I don't know, plus they have a very heavily levered balance sheet, so there's not a lot of room for any mistakes. And they also have a bigger contract deal coming up with Comcast, probably around the end of the year, so this risk is still there. But again, a good day for Warner Brothers Discovery, ensuring coverage with Charter.
But on the flip side, let's go to Kroger.
Yep.
So that was actually quite a good quarter, but I wonder if this is like a recession quarter play or what?
I mean, retail, I feel like, has been really mixed as we've been watching it through earnings season. Kroger is actually one of my personal favorites. I used to shop there all the time in Virginia, but I haven't quite found one up north. But Kroger actually lifted its full year guidance. It's benefiting from customers that are really prioritizing spending on groceries and other essentials. We're seeing shares up about 6% today. And this is really just thinking about the resilient grocery spending. And it seems that, you know, when we think about it from a consumer perspective, people are really picking and choosing what brands work for them, and it seems that Kroger is one of the beneficiaries.
Yeah, you got a Walmart, Target, Kroger. Like there's a theme here. Guys. All right, there's one other stock, and I want to see if Paul's illustration of how to say the word made sense, and if you're going to repeat that for us.
Okay, we're looking at Norfolk Southern.
Awesome.
Gotta say it slow.
I think that worked. I didn't see the problem last time, but I'll go with you on that.
I had an extra L.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently
okay.
so.
It's been known. Okay.
That's ticker NSC. We're seeing shares, they paired their drop substantially, but earlier they were down about 1.5%. And this is after news that the company fired its CEO, Alan Shaw. This was an investigation that showed that he violated company policies by engaging in a consensual relationship with the company's chief legal officer, who was also fired after this news. But I mean, the company has really been in a battle for a couple years. I mean, if we think back to that toxic train derailment that everyone was really thinking about with this company, and then of course, the activism, when we're thinking about the activist campaign that's really been on top of Norfolk. I got it there.
Yeah. Okay.
it's really just been in focus this year. And so this is some really interesting news, especially when you think about the top leader of the company.
Well, my memory of Norfolk Southern was when I worked for an investment bank down in Richmond, Virginia. My office overlooked the James River, beautiful view.
Lovely.
The Norfolk Southern and CSX rail line was right there, and the trains would just go by west to east 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day of coal from West Virginia going to Norfolk to be sent off to Europe. And Norfolk Southern trains, CSX trains all day. And as a train lover, that was great.
I literally am visualizing like Paul in the corner of his office while doing deals, basically like hanging out with popcorn, like
jumping for joy.
All right, Nora, thanks a lot. Norma Linda joining us from Bloomberg News. So here's a company that I find is really interesting, and I feel like it's an important conversation and one to discuss. And the company is Calumet Specialty Products. Ticker is CLMT. It trades on the New York Stock Exchange. It trades about $16.44 a share. It's a $1 billion company. It's been around for a very, very long time. It's been growing through M&A for the past 30 years. They have a ton of assets. They make things like Vaseline, WD-40, Tire Shine.
Really?
They take oil and they make the products that you use every day to function. 3 years ago, though, one asset was turned into something a little bit different. It's their Montana refinery, and they now use that to process things like vegetable oil, canola oil, corn oil to make sustainable aviation fuel. That's kind of interesting. So I wanted to talk about it. CEO Todd Broman joins us now. Hey, Todd, you make all the stuff that we use every day. Walk us through your decision, though, to spend all this time and money on the Montana refinery to make SAF.
Yeah, you bet. First, Alex, Paul, thanks for having us today. Super excited to be here with you. Look, we're an entrepreneurial and innovative company at our heart. That's what we've been, for the last 30 years. And we saw an opportunity. We had a great facility that was making specialty asphalt in Great Falls, Montana, a few years ago, early on in kind of the COVID days, actually, in 2020. We kind of looked at the environment and said, hey, this facility is in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Arguably the fastest growing area in all of energy is, sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel, and we're a logistically advanced facility. We sit right on top of a whole bunch of renewable feedstock. We have direct access to California, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, a truck ride away from Canada. So we looked at that opportunity and just said, hey, we can make this conversion and turn something that's a really nice niche specialty asphalt facility into a, leader in sustainable aviation fuel. In fact, we're the largest in the Western Hemisphere, and we'll keep saying that for a little bit longer. But, just really excited about the business, where we're at, and the growth trajectory of both that niche of a business and Calumet as a whole.
So I guess the question becomes, so here we go. We talk to like airline CEOs and they're like, yeah, we totally want SAF, but it's kind of expensive and or the supply's not really there. When you decided to make this transformation, did you set up long-term contracts with an airline where they're going to pay you a certain amount of money for your offtake? And if so, how did that work?
Interesting question. So what we have is a massive amount of flexibility. We can make renewable diesel or SAF. And obviously we talk a lot about SAF because that's new and it's associated with a potential DOE loan, and we have a large potential max SAF expansion that will take us from the largest producer in North America to one of the largest, if not the largest, in the world. So very excited about that, and SAF gets a lot of coverage. But really early on, we initially launched with almost all renewable diesel, and we were selling to large blue chip companies. And on the SAF side, we're partnered with Shell, who's one of the largest SAF into-wing fuelers there is. So what we do is we provide, the SPK, which Shell will then take all across the country, even into Canada, blend it. They have the last mile logistics, and then they actually, serve the airline, do the QC, do the last mile terminaling, fueling at the facilities, all of that. And SAF's interesting. It's such a high growth area that at this point it's one airline, one airport at a time in converting. Because when you think about the complexities that are involved in really changing the supply chain into fueling, of something as sensitive as and important as an airport, you want to make sure you have it right. So it's really one airport at a time. We sell to Shell. Shell takes it to their facility. They blend it and ultimately inject it into the fuel the airplane.
Wow, it's just amazing. And man, you weren't kidding, Todd. Great Falls, Montana. Dude, that is up there. I mean, it's north of Yellowstone National Park. You're just a stone's throw from Canada, so I can't imagine that is just extraordinary out there. Todd, talk to us about like the quality of the fuel. We were just talking to an airlines analyst who was just talking about, the need to get greater efficient engines from a fuel efficient perspective. What's the quality and the performance of the sustainable aviation fuel that you guys produce?
One of the things that's so beautiful about both sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel is it's really a drop-in fuel. There have been a lot of technologies talked about to help with the energy transition, and a lot of them particularly in airline, which we think is the hardest to abate of all of the transportation sectors. It requires a change in infrastructure. If you're doing battery fueled, you have to obviously have a completely different plane. Hydrogen's been talked about, completely different engine. SAF, one of the beautiful things about it is it really just drops into an existing supply chain. So it's easy. It works just as well as traditional fuel. Obviously, it's very highly monitored. The QC on it's incredibly important, but molecularly, it's very similar to existing jet fuel that is out there today. So we can just drop it into the same, system. There's some blending and QC work that happens kind of there at the facility from Shell, but it's not something like an ethanol or a biodiesel that, is able to be blended at very small amounts. It's really molecularly a very similar product to the jet fuel that's being used today. And on the renewable diesel front, in fact, end users don't even have to differentiate. You can use renewable diesel or diesel and not even differentiate between the two. They're molecularly the same.
So when you decided to make this transformation in the last 3 years with this refinery, was it expensive? Did it cost a lot?
Yeah, it costs a lot. And in fact, when we started it, our stock was about $1 in the depths of COVID. So we really went all in on this. We've had a lot of conviction about sustainable aviation fuel, about renewable diesel, and most importantly, I think Montana's competitively advantaged position in that area. So it was a major bet, but we were able to make that decision quickly and actually go from ideation to fully operating in just a few years. So we stood it up at the very end of 2022. 2023 was kind of, we were piecing together the various phases of the startup and commissioning. We worked out the kinks, and in the second quarter of 24, we really demonstrated what a full steady state production can look like at Montana Renewables. So it's an incredibly exciting time.
So who do you compete against? Is there a competition? Is there a market here? Is there a competitive landscape for sustainable aviation fuel?
It's interesting. So every country is a little bit different. In North America, there are really only two suppliers currently. There are a few more that are coming on because obviously this is just a major growth area. But right now, there are only two that are producing. So and it's not, at least today, a mandated market. So obviously airlines will make commitments and try to get ahead of the game. They expect mandates to come down the road. Same thing with individual entities. So there's private airlines are a big user. So there's certainly a big market as it exists today. But the incremental supply is actually imported. Now, if you go globally, that's a little bit different. When you go globally, there are mandates. And the UK, for example, just came out and they're going to mandate, nearly a third of a billion gallons by 2030. Singapore, same thing, 150 million gallons by 2030. Japan, India. So there are globally a lot of mandates coming on. And just here in our own, backyard in the United States, we have the SAF Grand Challenge, which says we want to have 3 billion gallons a year of SAF production by 2030 and 35 billion gallons a year by 2050. So, today we're the largest in North America and we're making 30 million gallons to 45 million gallons a year.
Yeah.
So
Todd,
it speaks to just how early we are.
We got to leave it there, but that was really interesting. I really appreciate it. Definitely come back. Let us know how that's going. I also want to hear expansion plans or other plans along this area. Tab Roman, CEO of Calumet Specialty Products, joining us on the future of SAF, and also like they make stuff like Vaseline also. All right, coming up next, David Schwartz, co-principal CEO of Slate, will be joining us. It's about the workforce, affordable housing in New York City, and that congestion pricing.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow Jones Industrial Average in the red right now, down 32, 40,829 on the Dow. A drop right now of just under 0.1%. S&P 500 index is advancing by 10, up by about 0.2%. Nasdaq up 76. That is a gain of 0.4%. 10-year yield 3.69% with a 2-year right now of 3.67%. Spot gold is trading higher by $41 the ounce to $25.52 for gold. That is an advance of 1.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil also rallying right now. WTI up 3.3%, $69.55 on WTI. WTI. Stocks are fluctuating as another faster than estimated inflation reading did little this morning to alter bets that the Federal Reserve will be cutting rates. In the meantime, two of Wall Street's largest investment banks are rolling out measures that may ease junior bankers' workloads amid complaints across the industry that weekly hours are increasingly creeping past 100 now. Sources tell Bloomberg JP Morgan Chase will limit junior banker hours to 80 per week in most cases. And another source says Bank of America is launching a new internal platform that will more closely monitor individual workloads. JP Morgan Chase down right now by 0.3%. Bank of America up 0.1%. Bottom line here, U.S. stocks struggling to gain direction. S&P little changed, up by just under 0.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pell, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. That's the internet, I'm told. So you go to Bloomberg.com or go to YouTube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. Let's talk about housing. There's a pronounced shortage of housing in the United States, and that is certainly true here in New York City. So let's break that down a little bit. David Schwartz joins us. David is co-founder and principal of Slate Property Group. Slate is developing over $4 billion in real estate throughout New York City, representing over 4,000 apartments. So a good source for us. And Abigail Doolittle joins us, markets reporter for Bloomberg News. Both of them in our studio here. David, at Slate, what are you guys doing? First of all, frame out the housing challenges in New York City and kind of how you guys are trying to deal with that.
Hey, first of all, thanks for having me here today, and happy to be here to talk about housing. I mean, I think it's no surprise that we have a shortage of housing. We have a supply side issue. There just aren't enough units for people. So if you think about overall supply and demand metrics, we have more people that need housing than housing to be supplied. New York has been undersupplying housing for a long time, and now we're starting to see that around the country. But we have many, many years of undersupply of housing and more people that need housing than housing available. So housing prices are going up, and we're seeing a crisis.
Well, before we dig into affordable housing here in New York City, and I know that you have a couple of exciting projects, one in Brooklyn and one out by JFK, let's talk about the fact that for the first time in your memory, housing, affordable housing, is a core issue in the presidential election. Is it that supply issue, or what's going on nationwide that this is such a big deal?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I am so pleased to see that this is being talked about at the national level. Housing is a crisis that all Americans are facing, whether we're in New York or North Carolina, Florida, the Midwest, the West Coast. It's everywhere. And it's becoming a huge issue, and it's a supply side problem. We don't have enough units, and we need a lot more. And that's why it's nice to hear we heard a presidential candidate talking about producing a lot more housing. I think she talked about 3 million units. I think that's a good start. I actually think we need a lot more than that, but I'll start with 3 million. I think it's a good way, but I think we're talking about a problem that's in the 10 million plus range.
How did we get here? I mean, has our population surged over the last 20 or 30 years? How did we get here?
Look, it's slowly and then quickly. I think we stopped producing enough units. I think that after the GFC, we stopped producing a lot of units. We built fewer units. We built bigger units. Housing, the size of houses, if you guys remember, like the Levittowns for people from the New York area, we were building houses that were 1,300 square feet.
Yep.
Now houses are 3,000 square feet. There are fewer units. They're bigger. They're more expensive. But it's just total number of units. If you look at anywhere, New York hasn't supplied enough, but the whole country hasn't. And now we're in a place in which housing costs have increased with inflation. Borrowing costs have increased. So we're adding more problems to an already problematic area.
So do you, in terms of actual affordable housing, I know that this is an umbrella term for, say, workforce housing, among other types of housing. Can you dig down into that a little bit more before we get specific on Slate's properties? And we should mention, we actually had your other co-founder and principal, Martin Nussbaum, join us a couple of months ago to talk more broadly about your multifamily and outside of affordable housing. But this is such an interesting topic.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think it's important to realize that this is one ecosystem. So all housing is related to all other housing. So if anybody who's bought a home, you might have wanted to buy a home for certain dollars, you can't afford it, you buy a home for a little bit less. So everything is related. So any housing that's produced impacts affordable housing. So we need to produce a lot more housing. So one of the things that Slate is doing is we filled a role where we are providing leverage. We're filling the gap where a lot of banks are no longer able to provide financing because of all the things that happen in the banking sector. So without financing, you can't build more units. So that's one of the areas that we're looking at. And then on the other side, we're looking to build lots of units, whether it's workforce housing or all the differences. The truth is, affordable housing means different things to different people. But the fact is, most people are spending the majority of their income on housing. Unless you're really, really wealthy, your biggest expenditure is probably housing. So whether you're talking about the teacher or the fireman, or you're talking about somebody that works in a fast food restaurant, they both probably having a real crisis with affording their housing. And it's not really pitting them against each other because they both really need good quality and affordable housing, but just at different levels.
So tell me some of the projects that you got going on.
So, we're doing something that I think is super innovative. We're converting the first hotel in New York State to 100% affordable housing, the Baisley Park. And
Wait, hotel to housing, that's usually really tricky, right? It's not as simple as like put a door in and you're done.
Well, it is tricky, but we made it a little bit less tricky. So I
Okay.
think what we liked about it is we take a hotel room, and if you have one hotel room, that's a studio. You knock down a wall for 2 hotel rooms, and you turn it into a 1-bedroom. You knock down 2 walls, and it's a 2-bedroom, if that makes sense. And really, the key there is we can build these units in half the time. Because one of the problems we have is that people that need affordable housing, if you need affordable housing, you need it pretty quickly, right?
Yep.
So 3 years or 5 years is probably less important to you than if we could deliver it in a year or so. I think that's something we could do around the country. So we're doing the first one in New York. We're fortunate here to have some really, really smart and talented and innovative people because it was complicated, but it's something that we are looking at doing elsewhere. We're actually working on a deal in North Carolina right now to do it, and I think there's some prospects in Tennessee, out in Utah, and a few other places.
What's it like building housing in New York City? It doesn't. I got lots of images. I think the movies have been made about it, TV shows. What's it like building stuff in New York City?
I think, look, let's not pretend it's not really hard to do anything in New York. Yeah, I grew up here and I first started building here, so I think it's easier to start in the hardest place and go to the other places, right? I think they say if you make it here, you can make it anywhere. I'd say that's what it's like in housing. Look, it's really hard to build in New York. It's hard. New Yorkers are spirited, have a lot of opinions. I say that if you have 10 people, you'll get 15 opinions on how to do something. But I think it's great. I do think we have the most talented people working in government sector, in financing, and building in New York. I think we have the most talented people in the country, which is great. It's hard, it's challenging, but we're up for the challenge. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I'm a Brooklynite, so we're ready for the challenge. And having a little bit of a fight as part of it, that's kind of what we do. So.
Well, not only are you a lifelong New Yorker, but your family is also a known New York family. Your father is Gridlock Sam, and so of course we've recently had some of this controversy around congestion pricing. It was about to happen, and then at the 9th hour, Governor Hochul struck it down. More recently, I heard that maybe we're going to get a more diluted version of it. What are your thoughts there? And if it doesn't go through, do the businesses of New York have to pick up that extra revenue?
Yeah,
and does it get passed down? Of course it does.
Yeah, so my dad was the first deputy transportation commissioner, coined Gridlock. So for many years, I've been known as Gridlock Sam's son, and even sometimes nicknamed Gridlock myself. So, so traffic has been a big part of our life. Yeah, look, there's no question that it is clogging up our streets. We can't move. Anyone who drove in Manhattan yesterday was probably stuck in traffic for an hour.
Oh my God. I mean, but that's unique.
Yeah,
Yesterday was a unique day.
But, in general, I think it's slowing down the economy. I think something needs to be done. I think, congestion pricing, I'm a fan of it. I know there's a lot of people that are not so happy with it. But again, we need something to make traffic work better. We need people to be able to get to places and do business. So we got to do something because New York sometimes grinds to a halt.
And it kind of goes to the pull and push between mass transit, taking money from congestion pricing to fund what's underground oftentimes, which I'm a big fan of the subway system. It's the most efficient way to get around in the system. I'll die on that hill against anybody. So it's so complex. It's just simply a question of dollars and cents. Who's going to pay for it?
Look, we need a lot of investment into our subway system. I'm a big subway guy myself. It's the fastest way to get around if I can't walk. We need a big investment into it. If you look at our subways versus other first world countries, you know, they're lacking. I think our subway system was incredible. We need a lot more money for it. And yeah, that's always the problem. Who's going to pay for any of our infrastructure? It's with our affordable housing, right? We need a lot more money. You know, affordable housing is infrastructure as well. I think that's a big point. It really is. It's like schools and roads and bridges and fire departments. I mean, it's the lifeblood. You know, why does society pay for those other things? It's to make society work. And I think, you know, affordable housing is infrastructure. It's all related. You can't look at it on its own.
Yeah.
Where's John Tucker when you need him? We have someone that joins us for the radio show who lives in Jersey and is like horrifically horrified by the congestion pricing risk because it's going to cost him so much more money to get to work.
Let's get him on with my dad, Gridlock Sam.
Yeah. Oh my God!
Talk about it.
And he also comes in at like 3 a.m. or like 2 a.m. in the morning, right? So we're not gonna take a train at 2 a.m. in the morning. So anyway, he bemoans it quite a bit. All right, David, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Great stuff. David Schwartz joining us, co-principal and CEO of the Slate Property Group. Abigail Doolittle, we also appreciate you coming in for that as well. There was also a story. Did you see this, Paul? That New York rents came down, and I say come down with like air quotes
yes.
because it's still over $4,100 on average.
Yeah, it's just extraordinary. And again, you know, I have a daughter who lives in Brooklyn, has been doing this thing, and a couple things I noticed. The rents, you know, after that very short window during the pandemic when she had the leverage and got a phenomenal deal. Now it's flipped back like it's always been, and it's in the landlords. But the second thing is, which is different from when I lived in the city, is that most of these places only do 1 year rents. So you're constantly either moving in or moving out or negotiating with find a new apartment. These kids all the time are just moving and moving and moving.
I don't know how you do that. How do you build roots like that?
You don't, and it's just crazy. But that's what the landlords can do because that's the supply and demand that David was just talking about. More demand than supply, and so the leverage is with the landlords, and they can just mark these things up every single year.
Well, there you go. That's like across the street with all the storefronts. There's nothing there.
Yep.
Turn those whole buildings there into apartments, and what that actually winds up looking like. All right, coming up, Barry Ritholtz will be joining us, founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management. He's also host of Masters in Business. He'll join us on markets and investing. If I just take a look at what's happening right now in the markets, nothing's happening. NASDAQ is up 0.3%. That's all I got for you. This is Bloomberg Intelligence.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are fluctuating as another faster than estimated inflation reading did little to alter bets on Federal Reserve rate cuts. We got the S&P little changed, up by just under 0.1% right now at 55.58, a gain of 4 points. Dow Industrials down 15, little change there, while NASDAQ is higher by 42, up by about 0.2%. 10-year 3.67% with a 2-year 3.66%. Gold up $41 the ounce now to $25.53, a gain of 1.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil higher by 2.9%. WTI 69.30 for a barrel, and Brent crude, the global benchmark, at 72.37, higher today by 2.5%. The Labor Department is out with another round of inflation data following yesterday's consumer price index. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The U.S. Producer Price Index rose a mild 0.2% in August after holding steady in July. Year over year, the PPI rose less than 2%. With America's inflation surge fading, the Federal Reserve is projected to start trimming interest rates next week, with the focus shifting to the health of the labor market. U.S. interest rates are currently running at 2-decade highs. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Shares of Signet Jewelers are surging after the company said sales of its engagement jewelry are up, a sign that a crucial part of its business is recovering as more couples agree to wed following a pandemic lull. We've got Signet shares up now by just about 15%. Signet, of course, the owner of Zales and the K-Chains. After the close of trading today, we will be hearing from Adobe. Adobe shares ahead of earnings, down 0.5%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate that. As always, Charlie Pellet, we got Alex Steele, you got Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. You can find us there. We got a lot of economic data over the past week, 2 weeks, concluding with, we're going to get the Fed next Wednesday. The expectation is we're going to get a rate cut. How much is probably 25 basis points, but who knows? So you kind of got that in the rearview mirror. Now what do you look at? I don't know. I guess maybe earnings. We'll talk to Barry Ritholtz, host of Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio. He's also got a day job, founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management. He joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. So Barry, again, we spent all week, 2 weeks digesting all this economic data, and I guess the Fed's going to cut. Now what do we do for a living? I got 5 hours a day to fill, buddy. What do we talk about?
Your job is much harder than my job because I get to tell people, hey, you're going to be great in 10 or 20 years. You got to give them stuff every day. So look, we're always in a holding pattern. We're always obsessed about today and here and now rather than looking at the fullness of time, not to get zen on you or anything. But look, we're in the middle of September. That means earnings season is right around the corner. We're at or near all-time highs. Everybody is hyper-focused due to the recency effect of whatever news just came out. We're focused on PCE, we're focused on CPI. Last week we were focused on non-farm payrolls. And then what's the Fed going to do? It has been, 18 months since Wall Street thought the Fed would begin cutting. And the market, certainly since October 2022, has powered higher despite expectations of rate cuts not materializing. So you have to appreciate this is a long game, and if you get too focused on the minutia, you're gonna miss the forest for the trees.
Okay, so let me just put this out there. Is it possible that NVIDIA matters more than what the Fed does next week in terms of moving the equity market?
NVIDIA is so specific to AI generally and chips that it's hard to think that what happens in NVIDIA... Now, if the exception is if NVIDIA says something like, we can't get our parts that we need to do what we need to do because of inflation, or we see consumers slowing or something along those lines. But, they're a supplier to other manufacturers. It's hard to imagine a scenario other than we believe China is invading Taiwan imminently. It's hard to imagine NVIDIA other than owners of NVIDIA. And there is a cascading effect. When NVIDIA falls, the NASDAQ falls, the S&P falls. It generally creates
Or like yesterday, like the massive move that we saw for like no actual reason.
And then how long did that last? What was that? Like by the end of the day, not even.
That's what I'm saying.
By the middle of the day, it had
reversed.
unwound. Look, if you lived through, forget the financial crisis or Lehman blowing up, if you lived through any of the many flash crashes or the big one, the 2010 and 2011, if you've lived through Volmageddon and that sort of thing, you just have to accept that markets are now driven by machines and robots and algorithms. And sometimes, every now and then you'll watch something crazy happen on Amazon where there's 2 books that are somewhat unusual and rare, and whatever the pricing algorithms that are involved will start a bidding war with each other, and the price just goes up. By the way, nobody is buying these books. It's just sitting there. But these algos scrape all the data. They come up with a formula to where should we price this. Sometimes it's collusion and sometimes it's price fixing. But most of the time, it's just a data input. How do we price this? Now, take that times 3,300 stocks and millions of players, and you get some odd moves. It happens on the regular basis. Fortunately, we seem to constantly put in new guide rails and circuit breakers, but yesterday we were nowhere near shutting anything off. Nothing really came close to that.
Switch gears just a smidge.
Do it. Go for it.
I'd love to get your thoughts, Barry, on the evolution to electronic vehicles. Where are we in making that evolution? It seems that we've hit it's either a bump in the road or this thing ain't happening.
So it's a really fascinating question.
Barry's a car expert.
It's a fascinating question. How much time do we have? I'll give
we've got 2 minutes and 40 seconds.
All right, so the short version
That's
is...
to the hard break.
Yes.
The short version is after everybody saw what Bezos and Amazon did to retailers, the auto industry said, we're not going to let Elon do to us what Bezos did to all the retail. So they poured a lot of money into it. There can be little doubt that electric vehicles are more reliable, they take less maintenance, lower total cost of ownership, arguably much faster, not just faster. Now, you run into a problem now that they've been out for 5 or 10 years. What happens 7 years in when you have a battery that's only operating at 50, 60, 70%? Depending on the vehicle, it's 10, 15, 20 grand to replace. I could drop a crate motor into anything for 5 grand. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is, we just bought an SUV in spring. We were waiting for a hybrid. It never showed up. And so finally it's like, all right, this is going to be the last internal combustion gasoline engine we're going to buy. You look at what's going on with Toyota and what they're doing with hydrogen, not the prior generation of hydrogen where you have these big, heavy tanks, but hey, we're going to fill the tank with water and through a process, separate the oxygen from the hydrogen and burn the hydrogen, and our waste product is going to be water. That is a retrofit of a traditional internal combustion engine. Toyota has been an expert in hybrid technology. If this technology catches on, well, then electric is going to be seen as just a bridge to the next technology.
Can't there be everything? Can't we do it all?
Sure. I mean, the problem is the infrastructure. You have a century of gasoline stations
So you're going to make
everywhere.
a whole hydrogen pump, and then you're going to have an EV
Right.
charger.
Well, not if you have to. If you're just pumping and take your garden hose and fill up your car that way. Remember, water is hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen is not only the most plentiful element in the universe, but it's what powers stars. There's a lot of energy in deuterium, which is H2, 2 hydrogen atoms locked together. So I don't know what ultimately wins, but it feels like hybrid is a transitional technology. We'll find out if the end game is electric or if electric is yet another.
All right. All I know is I'm going to fill up this weekend at the Jersey Shore, maybe below $3 a gallon.
It's going to be a moment.
So it's like,
It'll be a moment.
Same price as 20 years ago.
25
years ago.
Hey, Barry, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Barry Ritholtz joining us, founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management, plus host of Masters in Business. Coming up, we're going to talk about Intel and the rough road it has for recovery. This is Bloomberg.
is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. So one stock you look at that truly should give you terror is Intel.
Yeah.
The stock is worth $19 a share. And if I just go back to just 5 years ago, and I just go to the little annotate button there, that stock is down a whopping 64%.
Wow.
This used to be the chip darling for decades. And now it just seems to have struggled to find any momentum and direction. So Ian King had a wonderful story out on Bloomberg Big Take. It says, Intel has no easy options after long stinging fall from grace. Ian King is Bloomberg News U.S. semiconductor and networking reporter. Ian, it was a great piece, and it helped me truly understand what happened. I guess the question is, they missed this AI move. How did they do that?
Yeah, I mean, missing the AI move is arguably the latest sort of situation that they have found themselves in this kind of long progression of problems that kind of have begun to manifest themselves and deepen. They had chips. They saw that this market was coming. They made acquisitions, but frankly, under previous leadership of the company, did not execute, did not push that as hard as they should have done, and allowed the opposition, and obviously the most obvious recipient of their bounty is NVIDIA, to sort of steal this golden opportunity and suck in all of the money that's being spent.
So, Ian, I'm looking at the long-term chart here, and I'm going to ignore the 99-2000 period because I was there, and it was kind of all a scam. But if I look just back in mid-June of 2021, the stock was, over $60 a share. It's fallen 70% since that high. Is that because if you look at the prior, 10, 20 years, this stock has been moving generally higher. And it feels like they just, as Alex said, they just missed this pivot for the industry to AI. So my question is, can it recover?
Yeah, I mean, the missing of the pivot is just one factor that we're talking about here. You're referencing 2021. Remember, at that point, Intel was 3 times the revenue of NVIDIA then, okay? That recently. All right, that's how precipitous the fall has been.
Yeah.
Obviously, what happened, though, then was that, Intel was manifesting some issues then. They brought back a former darling of the company, a former, basically favorite son of the original founders of this company, and Pat Gelsinger. He brought this formula. This is what we need to do. We need to spend a lot of money. We need to get our technology back to the leadership. Everybody thought that he had the right idea, frankly, a lot of them still do. The issue that's manifested itself between then and now is how much that's costing and whether Intel can afford it. And what we're seeing is that Intel cannot afford it, and it's not happening as quickly as some had hoped.
So now what? Like, none of the options look great, but the U.S. government has sort of hung its hat on its Arizona plant, et cetera. Like, they can't just give that up.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S.'s role, the government's role in this, and we're all taxpayers, so we should be rooting for Intel to turn this around, is important because they will ultimately have the say in whether there's a transfer of ownership, whether something gets sold off or whatever. But you have to bear in mind that the massive amounts of money that they're giving Intel aren't massive for the semiconductor industry. And this is why Intel is in this situation it is. Once momentum swings against you, if you're building a plant that costs $20 billion, that plant in the chip industry has a valuable life of maybe 5 years. So you've got to do a lot of business, a lot of high margin business to make that worthwhile. If you can't fill those factories, if you're building them and literally nobody's coming, that's a giant millstone around your back, right? This is not the software industry, right, where you reassign engineers, right? These are physical things that get built and have to be used. Otherwise, they drag you down.
And just, again, stock down 60% year to date. The market's voting no on this. So is there pressure building to split up the company, a radical restructuring, a change in management? Are there pressures mounting on this company?
Yeah, I mean, what you just described is the classic Wall Street playbook here. And obviously, they're a publicly traded company, so that will be a factor in what happens. But we're in a slightly different situation in that you already have effectively a new management in place with a plan that everybody has signed off on. What has happened is we've realized that we probably can't afford that. So what's going on right now at a board meeting, which finishes today, is they are looking for ways where we can cut back further, where we can stop doing some of the things that perhaps are a bit marginal to save money to keep this plan going. If that doesn't prove enough, if we don't get signs of more money coming in from the business improving from new customers, then what happens, we have to look at more fundamental possibilities, and that's our understanding of what's going on. So we're not at the breakup point right now, but certainly given this company's importance and its opportunities and what it can potentially be, clearly others are looking at this as a potential scenario that they might get involved in.
Hey, Ian, really appreciate it. It was a great read. It was really helpful. Ian King, Bloomberg News, semiconductor and networking reporter. Man, that is like quite a fall from grace.
$74 billion of revenue, $74 billion of revenue back in 2021. Forecast this year, 52. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. All right, that wraps it up for Bloomberg Intelligence. Do not miss New York Yankees Hall of Fame shortstop Derek Jeter and Untucked Kit founder Chris Riccobano on Bloomberg in Business Week discussing their athletic wear collaboration, Greatness Wins. Do not miss that. Find it Bloomberg Radio and TV and on YouTube at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. That wraps it up on this non-moving market day for Paul and myself. Coming up, Balance of Power with Joe Matthew is up next. Happy Thursday.
Politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The first batch of ballots are in the mail. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As Alabama becomes the first state to issue absentees, they're going out today. Just as the latest inflation data hits the tape, we're joined ahead by Bloomberg Politics editor Laura Davison. Republicans split on whether to greenlight the use of offensive weapons provided by the West in Ukraine. We're going to talk about this important inflection point coming up with military analyst Kelly Grieco from the Stimson Center, and Speaker Johnson shelves the stopgap plan to fund the government. We'll have more ahead from Capitol Hill with analysis from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist Rick Davis is with us, alongside Democratic strategist Kristen Hahn from Rock Solutions. So let's get started once again, and we start as always on Wall Street. An update on trading this PPI day from Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. Indeed, stocks trading mix. Do want to begin, though. Developing story headline right off the Bloomberg Professional Service. New York City's Police Commissioner Edward Caban is resigning amid a DOJ investigation. That word coming moments ago. The commissioner announcing his resignation in a message to the New York Police Department. So again, headline right now on the Bloomberg. New York's Police Commissioner Edward Caban resigning amid a DOJ investigation. U.S. stocks trading mixed, as I mentioned. Little change. That's the key takeaway right now. PPI Thursday. We have got the, right now, the S&P little change, flat on the day, down by half a point. Dow Industrials down 68, decline there of 0.2%. On NASDAQ is up 24, holding on to a gain of just about 0.1%. Stocks are fluctuating as another faster than estimated inflation reading does little to alter bets on Federal Reserve rate cuts. The 10-year 3.68% with the 2-year 3.66%. Gold is surging $41 the ounce to $22.53, up by 1.2% right now. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 3.1%, $69.44 for a barrel of WTI. Well, certainly Wall Street's focus shifting to next week's Fed decision. Jamie Patton is co-head of global rates at TCW Group. She was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Intelligence.
On Wednesday, we think it's almost a done deal that they'll just go 25 basis points after the comments that they snuck in before their blackout period on Friday and the non-farm payroll report, CPI this week. The market has the chance of 50 basis points down to like 15 or 20%.
Verizon Communications says it will take a charge of as much as $1.9 billion pre-tax in the third quarter as it eliminates about 4,800 jobs by next spring, that according to a regulatory filing. Again, recapping, we have got stocks trading little change. The Dow lower now by 0.1%. S&P just about flat on the day, higher now by 1 point. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. Balance of Power continues now, the Thursday edition. Back we go to Washington. And once again, your host. Here is Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, thank you. I subscribe to Charlie Pellet when I want to know what's happening on Wall Street. Are we lucky to have Charlie every day? He'll be back in about 15 minutes to keep tabs on what's happening. It's the way we get to do this on Bloomberg. This is the fastest show in politics, but we have to keep, obviously, not only tabs on the market, but the intersection of Washington and Wall Street. That's what makes this show special, and we welcome you. On Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, the road show begins. This is what happens coming off the debate, right? All the pollsters go in the field and the candidates hit the road. You could probably tell me where they're going at this point if you listen to this broadcast. But Kamala Harris back on the road today. North Carolina is where it's going to happen. Charlotte, Greensboro, Tim Walz in Michigan. Yes, hello, Grand Rapids. Doug Emhoff heading to Arizona, Nevada, Florida the next couple of days. And, of course, the Trump campaign is traveling as well. This is it. This is the last big push, right? Donald Trump today in Tucson, Arizona, where he will be focusing on Latino voters, on to Nevada after that with an event on inflation and the economy in Las Vegas on Friday. That's tomorrow, finally, Friday. So thanks for joining us here. This is a very important day. I don't think enough people are talking about this. It was supposed to happen last week. North Carolina, remember, was going to send out the first batch of absentee ballots, and because of the challenge from RFK Jr., that was delayed. So we can tell you now with a straight face that today voting begins. And the prize goes to Alabama. Somebody tell Rick Davis. Alabama wins the race here, mailing out the first absentee ballots this morning, overtaking North Carolina. And there's a big one coming on Monday. That's where we start with Laura Davison, Bloomberg Politics editor, driving our coverage in the newsroom here in Washington. It's always great to see you. This is an important time here, particularly noting the confusion that Donald Trump has brought to this matter. This is an important strategy, right? Get people to vote now, even as he questions the veracity and legality of early voting.
Yeah, what both sides have realized, sort of at the party structure, maybe not necessarily in the Trump campaign structure, is that if people vote now, it means that on election day they don't decide that they don't really want to, or the lines are too long, or they have to work. If they vote now, that's in the bag, and then that vote is solidified. So in Alabama, ballots are going out. North Carolina, they should be going out soon. Obviously, a state that is now more in play, and in Pennsylvania on Monday, the first state and perhaps the most important state.
That's huge.
We'll start early voting, which means that people can go to the polls now. And so if the candidates realize this, that they have to be convincing voters now. You can't really leave anything on the table till November 4th.
That's why this debate again was so important this week. To think that some folks could have voted in North Carolina before that happened, they didn't have a chance. Now everyone's seen the debate. We got new numbers, by the way. Those were preliminary ratings we gave you yesterday at 58 million. Turns out 67 million people watched that debate this week, which is an overwhelming number and a lot more than we saw in the first debate.
A lot more than we saw in the first debate, a lot more than we saw, like almost 3 times what we saw for the convention. So this is a huge audience, perhaps the largest audience that either of them are going to have. And then when you count sort of the knock-on effects of all of the clips, if your social media feed looked anything like mine, it was just full of all sorts of memes and moments from the debate.
Yes, right. As far as early voting goes then, these people are armed with whatever they saw or wanted to see on Tuesday night. Alabama's one thing. It's the first, and that's why we're making something out of it. But voters there actually have to have a reason to vote by mail, such as being absent from the county or working on Election Day. Some other states have looser requirements. How do the campaigns target them?
So you really see the travel schedule, is all about Pennsylvania and North Carolina right now. You see Harris, she's in North Carolina today. She'll be in Pennsylvania tomorrow. Biden will be going on Monday, the day that voting kicks off. Trump as well has been really targeting those early voting states. You see him out west, for the weekend. He's doing a bunch of fundraising, which is also sort of a weak spot for him right now. Will be in California meeting with some big
ground game too, though, right? It's door knockers. It's advertising. It's telling people. Not everybody knows that this is on already.
And we've started to see some of the advertising from the super PACs, those outside groups, really pick up. So like Elon Musk's PAC is hiring door knockers specifically in North Carolina and Michigan, which is interesting that they see as sort of weak spots there, as well as advertising, specifically to young men. Another kind of area where you see that, sort of the soccer moms that were the sort of swing vote back a couple cycles ago. Now the Trump campaign is looking at young men.
I'm asking everybody this. You can give me a yes or no if you want. Is there going to be another debate?
I wouldn't bet on it. There will be a vice presidential debate. I
That
feel
we
great
know, yes.
about that.
Good answer. Sounds like a no on the
Trump has been all over the board. Remember, he didn't want to have this first debate, then he did, then he didn't. These things can change on a dime, but right now it seems that he is down on another debate.
Interesting, as always, to spend time with Laura Davison. Great work this week on the debate and always covering this campaign. Where are we at here? We're under 60 days, right? We're getting close.
55,
Laura.
I think.
Laura Davison is the one who 53 says producer James. I was told there'd be no math. Bloomberg Politics contributor, thank you, and editor Laura Davison. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington as we turn our attention, I'd say, to what's happening in Ukraine, but it's really here in Washington where we have a real argument, a concerted debate underway now. We brushed up on this yesterday about what to do with Western-provided and specifically U.S.-provided weapons in Ukraine. Should they be used offensively against Russia outside of the Kursk region where we've already seen a cross-border incursion? It's causing a split inside the Republican Party, as Donald Trump, who wouldn't even say the other night if he wanted Ukraine to win this war, finds himself at odds with a lot of hawks here in Washington. Michael McCall among them, Mike Rogers, who are calling for this to happen. A Democrat named Ben Cardin is doing the same. Obviously very important here when we talk about the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. We wanted to talk to an authority about this important moment because this could be a change in the war. Kelly Grieco is back with us, senior fellow at the Stimson Center's Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy program. When we talk strategy, we call Kelly, and it's great to see you here, Kelly. How important, and we're told, by the way, that a decision could be imminent here, at least that's what the whisper is in Washington. How important would be that change in strategy to loosen these restrictions?
First, thank you for having me. I'm afraid I don't think this decision will actually have, a real effect on the battlefield. I think it will be a short window if they're given these kinds of permissions, that it will make a difference. But again, I think that anyone who is expecting that taking, the leashes off and allowing the Ukrainians to engage in long-range strike is fundamentally going to change the trajectory of the war is going to be disappointed.
Well, I know you're going to tell me why, because Ukraine says they can start knocking down these MiGs that carry the big missiles the minute they take off, if they're allowed to, Kelly.
Yes. So, the Ukrainians have been clear about what they want to target, which is air bases and also logistics hubs. The problem, though, for Ukraine is that Russia is very large. And so, yes, the Russians can pull back their aircraft. They can pull their aircraft in particular further back. But to really have an effect, and really degrade Russian capabilities, we would need to be supplying the Ukrainians with really large numbers of missiles. So whether that's ATACMS or something like JASSMs. And certainly in ATACMS, we don't have the numbers for this kind of large campaign. And for them to use a missile called JASSM, which is a surface air-to-surface missile with their F-16s, they would have to fly their F-16s increasingly into Russian airspace, where they would be very vulnerable to air defenses.
So this is not so much a matter of permission. It's having the actual hardware to make a dent, Kelly. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it is about permission in the sense that the Ukrainians have respected the U.S. decision, not to use certain things on Russian territory. And so they definitely want those permissions. But I think when we're looking at the permissions, we should ask ourselves, what are the actual military benefits here as we weigh that in comparison to sort of the escalatory risks? And I would just argue that I don't think that the benefits are significant enough to necessarily justify the escalatory risks.
Yeah. Well, you've had a way of being right so far in this conflict, Kelly, and I'm sure that you watched the debate along with the rest of us the other night. Ukraine did play a bit of a role in the conversation. Donald Trump was asked twice, I referred to this, if he wanted Ukraine to win the war. Let's go back to Tuesday night in Philadelphia. Here's how it went.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for 250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are.
Okay, that said, Kelly, what would a Trump 2.0 mean for this question that we're asking today? These restrictions would remain in place, right?
I would think they certainly would. I think the larger question, though, is, this question of victory. What does victory look like in Ukraine? I think, at least in the West, we often think of that perhaps too much in terms of military victory, that you win by imposing, a complete victory on your adversary. And that's not going to happen for Ukraine, but you can achieve a political victory, so that at the negotiating table, that it's able to keep its country or largely keep its country intact. And I think the military realities are suggesting that both parties are going to need to head at some point to a negotiating table.
You say at some point. And President Zelensky would say, that's why I need these restrictions to come off. We need leverage. We need to make a dent before we sit down to negotiate, if I can even use that word, with Vladimir Putin. Does he have a point?
Yes, I understand this idea that he wants to negotiate from a position of strength. That's certainly true. I'll just say that I'm very concerned about Ukraine's military position right now. I think the Kursk offensive has sent a lot of manpower and equipment to Kursk. And we now know that the Russians are engaged in a counteroffensive to try to take it back. But at the same time that they're now launching this counteroffensive, they're making gains in the east in Donbass. And Ukraine's position is quite fragile there at the moment. And so I think there's real concerns about Ukraine's ability to sustain the war at this moment. And I actually think that might be one of the reasons, that the Biden administration is even entertaining this idea of long-range strike, because we've tended to escalate at these moments when we fear Ukraine is losing. And so, rather than trying to achieve a real victory, I think, for Ukraine on a military sense, we need to figure out what's the way to prevent a Russian military victory. And that's probably really strengthening defensive positions.
Great insights from Kelly Grieco. And I'd like to ask you about what's happening in the Middle East. Kelly, with your expertise here in military strategy, it's an important headline. They're sending the Teddy Roosevelt home. This is the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier strike group. It was a big deal and a rare move to have two of them steaming their way toward the Middle East when a retaliatory strike by Iran was anticipated. The USS Abraham Lincoln still there. What does this tell you when we peel off an entire carrier strike group? Has the threat level diminished?
Yes, I would say that's certainly the signal that's being sent, that there must be a feeling in the administration, given whatever intelligence they have, to suggest that a strike is not imminent. I think it's quite remarkable, frankly, that we haven't seen an Iranian attack. It's clear that the Iranians, on their part, have been careful about escalation, and it seems that they have, at least for the moment, decided not to proceed with some kind of major escalatory act. And I think obviously that's very good news for the Middle East and for all of us.
We were asking in the newsroom if this might be a part of the negotiating process, if this was an ask, for instance, as part of ceasefire negotiations.
Wow, that's a really good question. It's possible. I can't imagine that is necessarily something that, Hamas is particularly as much interested in. But of course, their Iranian backers may have asked for that. And it may be some kind of negotiation, an official negotiation with the Iranians, and then the Iranians would put more pressure on Hamas to accept some kind of ceasefire terms.
Amazing. I always love talking to you, Kelly. Thank you for joining us. Kelly Grieco shedding some light on what is happening in two regions, two theaters of war that the U.S. is involved in, either directly or indirectly. And we'll let you know if there is news in a break on the restrictions that we're talking about here. This is happening now that lawmakers are back in Washington in the wake of the debate that we just played a snippet for you there. The calls are growing louder among certain members of the Republican conference in the House that could unlock something here. And we'll let you know what happens with that. We're going to stay with what's going on in Congress. Mike Dorning will join us, the sage of politics here in the Bloomberg newsroom in Washington, D.C., as the Speaker of the House yanks the bill. We've got 19 days to a potential shutdown, and no plan, the one that we thought was going to move, has been put on the shelf. We'll have a lot more on the fastest show in politics next, here on Bloomberg.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow Jones Industrial Average in the red, the S&P Nasdaq. They're both advancing, but bottom line here, stocks are struggling to gain traction after a $1.3 trillion rally, with another faster than estimated inflation report this morning failing to boost market momentum. So the S&P 500 index is fluctuating after a 3-day advance, but right now the S&P up 8 points, a gain of 0.1%. The Dow down 30, decline there of 0.1%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 59, a gain right now of 0.3%. 10-year at 3.69%, with a 2-year 3.68%. Spot gold up $37 the ounce, up 1.5%, $25.48, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil $69.52 a barrel, up 3.2%, and Brent back above $72 a barrel, a gain there of 2.8%. Micron Technology shares lower by 4.6% after BNP Paribas Exane downgraded the chipmaker by 2 notches to underperform from outperform. After the bell today, among the names scheduled to report earnings, we'll be hearing from Adobe. That stock right now down 0.5%. And again, repeating our earlier headlines, New York City Police Commissioner Edward Caban has resigned after a little more than a year running the biggest American police force amid a federal investigation that led to agents searching his home this month. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. And once again, here is your host, Joe Matthew.
Okay, Charlie, thanks as ever. Welcome to the fastest show in politics, the Thursday edition. I had to think about it for a minute. We had a late night on Tuesday with the debate. Thought it might have been Friday. Little Friday is upon us, and I'm glad you're here as we track the ball on Capitol Hill. 19 days until a possible government shutdown. Don't put the countdown clocks up yet. No one's saying that's going to happen. Everyone actually is saying that it won't because they've seen this movie a lot of times recently. But it's not getting any easier. It was right around this time yesterday I told you that Speaker Johnson pulled the bill. Stopgap plan, 6 months long, tied to the SAVE Act, keep the government functioning. Whoever the new president is, not have to worry about it for a couple of months. But that's not going to happen. There are Republicans who do not like the 6-month duration. There are Democrats who don't like the SAVE Act. And we're back to start here with Mike Dorning, Bloomberg Politics editor, with us at the table here in Washington. Great to see you.
Great to be here.
Did you just replay the last movie to figure out how this one ends?
Well, this one, I think, is pretty much not something to worry about, to be perfectly honest. It would be shocking if the House Republicans really wanted to shut down the government as they're going into an election campaign. Now, there are divergent interests. President Trump would like to highlight this controversy over voter ID. He would like there to be more disarray to feed the narrative that things are going badly. And, lay the predicate, even if he loses, for saying, hey, there's something amiss here, and I don't want to recognize these results.
Is he just kicking up dust here before you go on, or is he actually going to convince certain Republicans or make it impossible for certain Republicans to vote for anything without the SAVE Act?
I think at the end of the day, it's more likely that the House Republicans' own interests would be dominant
Understood.
here.
We've seen that play out,
at least
too.
enough of them. And if you're someone like Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, you would rather sort of the majority continue next year, a Republican majority, or at least have a shot at that. So you're going to want to avoid having the House Republicans come out of left field and shut down the government right before an election. There are conservatives from safe districts inside the House Republican caucus who really don't have to worry about whether the House is controlled by Republicans or not, and they are more interested in helping Trump and insulating themselves against future challenges. But at the end of the day, they're likely to come up with something that will keep things going, most likely for 3 months, possibly for 6 months. But whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you probably don't want a 6-month extension because if you're hoping your guy wins, and then they chew up a lot of their time.
Interesting. So you kind of see the path only because of what you've already experienced.
Yeah, it's looking at people's actual interests.
Right. And the role that Donald Trump may or may not play in this, in the throes of an election here, it makes things interesting. And there's, Democrats think they're going to take the House, or at least they want to. And it wouldn't take a lot to do that. If that happens, does Mike Johnson get fired? Does he become minority leader?
It's a lot more likely that he gets fired if Democrats take the House, actually, than if they keep the House. And the reason being, one of the main reasons why Jim Jordan isn't Speaker of the House right now is that if you're running for Speaker, you have to get 218 total votes. But if you're running for Minority Leader, you don't need to get 218 votes. You just need to get a majority of your caucus. And actually, if you're in the minority, really what you need is a pit bull who's going to be attacking, especially if you're in a minority. And the guy who didn't get it last time is the pit bull of pit bulls. If there's Kamala Harris in the White House and the Republicans are in a minority, Mike Jordan may be conservative, but he's no pit bull.
Right. But that seems to be the most obvious next step. And Donald Trump would be okay with that, right?
Donald Trump would be okay with
Jim Jordan.
Yeah, but if I think Donald Trump would be okay with Jim Jordan no matter what.
Sure.
Whether he wins, loses, whether it's in the majority or minority, it's just whether you get the whole Congress behind him.
A lot of messaging going on. We certainly are no strangers to that as well. The House has been paying a lot of attention to China, passing this biosecure bill most recently, and it's part of a series of votes that are teed up for this week. Is this election year messaging or something that becomes kind of a suite of bills that could be a real law?
It's mostly election year messaging, but it does have real consequences. And it reflects a hardening of views on business ties with China, and it will likely result in real changes. So one thing, it's very likely that this Biosecure Act could actually become law. There's a way of doing it where you can just attach it to some defense authorization legislation likely to move later in the year. And then in general, because you've got this change where people on both parties in election years and not in election years both are more concerned about China, if you're a business that has ties to China, your political risk is rising, and this is showing you that.
Interesting, even though both campaigns are using TikTok as we speak, right? We talked earlier, Mike, about the argument over Ukraine right now, not funding, but permissions, whether the U.S. should loosen restrictions on the use of American-provided offensive weaponry against Russia. And we're seeing a bit of a fissure in the Republican Party on this when you see the Michael McCalls arguing with Donald Trump, for instance, who wouldn't say this week if he wants Ukraine to win the war. Is this going to happen? Ben Cardin's behind it. Is the administration going to move?
Well, at the end of the day, it is probably mostly up to the administration. The Biden administration has been cautious, but constantly ratcheting up the pressure on Russia. Joe Biden, Tony Blinken are products of the end of the Cold War and the initial U.S. peace. They're cautious people, but they are at the same time determined to confront Russia. So they want to avoid too wide a conflict, but ratchet up the pressure. So I would expect to constantly see incremental ways in which they go along with these things without doing it all at once and suddenly shocking Putin into some sort of escalation.
Brings us back to the no, then maybe, then yes that we've seen through
or
this
no,
whole
a
period.
little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more.
And eventually you get it all.
Yeah.
The question is whether it will be too late. Pretty interesting stuff here when you consider the timing of all of this, the seasonality. Lawmakers want to get home.
Yeah.
They need to run for re-election. Certainly those who are in the House and the frontliners don't have a lot of time to waste in Washington. Is that the way this actually gets done?
That is the way it gets done.
It's quite a motivator.
That's a big motivator, and also just the fact that the fiscal year ends on September 30. So do you really want to do like a 7-day, 2-day, 3-day extensions? No, you want to go back. You want to campaign. September 30 is a deadline when the government would run out of money. So if you're going to give it an extension, give it an extension until after your election. Then you deal with the hard questions, not while you just need to go out and get votes and get reelected.
Interesting update yesterday on the inauguration. We're talking about Capitol Hill, and I'm imagining January 20th. Everybody out there on the stands on the scaffolding to watch either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris be sworn into office. The Department of Homeland Security has declared January 6th. Meanwhile, this is when the
votes
election will be certified. I
Yeah,
think everyone knows that by now. To be a special event requiring added security measures, a national special security event means that the Secret Service will oversee the security plan. This is our new reality, isn't it?
It is our new reality. Something that, before 2020, I would not have been able to tell you offhand when the when the ballots were counted. January 6th to me meant Epiphany, a Catholic religious holiday. It wasn't like vote counting day, but now it means to me vote counting. Yeah, exactly. When we were kids, that was the day we always brought it down. You went to church, you went to mass. Now it's like every 4 years, it's the day that they count the votes, and it is a moment that could be fraught. But also, even the weeks after the election, you have to wonder now how things are going to play out, and to what extent there could be some civil unrest here or there.
Sure. Look, they're not playing around here. As we hear from the special agent in charge of the Secret Service's Dignitary Protective Division, remembering what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, not that long ago. National special security events are those of the highest national significance. In collaboration with federal, state, local partners, we are committed to developing and implementing a comprehensive and integrated security plan to ensure the safety and security of this event and its participants. They're going to be inside the building, and they have to be protected on this level, which is pretty remarkable. There will not be questions, though, about who's calling the National Guard.
Yeah, no, it'll be Joe Biden in charge there.
Well, right, but I mean, if they've got a plan like this in place, I don't think this is a game day call, I guess is my point, right?
Well, I doubt very much they will actually have too much, military presence on the streets.
No, of course.
But they may be, behind a building
be in
somewhere,
Maryland somewhere, yeah.
Or even, just like they often have in those big events, like a lot of riot police or a lot of military people, like in a building somewhere where they can pop out quickly.
Sure.
But I definitely, it's a different world. They will be ready to defend the Capitol.
We've got a lot to cover still in this campaign, and we'll certainly be doing it with Mike Dorning. Thanks, as always, for being with us.
Great to be here.
Bloomberg Politics editor with us. I always forget I'm on the air when I talk to Mike, but I'm pretty sure we are still on the air. Our panel is coming up next. Rick Davis and Kristen Hahn. I like this pairing, and we're going to have an update on Wall Street coming as well. Charlie Pellet will be with us in New York as we make our way through the fastest show in politics. Some important conversations ahead. News from Washington and the campaign trail as both campaigns get out there. We'll talk about the roadshow coming up because it is still about the blue wall for the Harris campaign. That's next, only on Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks struggling to gain traction. Dow Jones Industrial Average remains in the red. S&P, NASDAQ, they are both higher. We've got the S&P right now higher by 5, little changed at 55.59, up by about 0.1%. The Dow now lower by about 0.1%, down 34 points. NASDAQ is up 48, a gain of 0.3%. 10-year yield 3.69% with a 2-year that's now yielding 3.69%. Gold up $37 the ounce, up 1.5%, 25.48 for an ounce of the precious metal. A move for crude up 2.8%. WTI West Texas Intermediate 69.19 a barrel. Brent crude up now by 2.4%, back above $72 a barrel, 72.27 on WTI. Jobless claims rose for the first time in 3 weeks, and with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The data are consistent with a gradual slowdown in the labor market, though last week's tally of 230,000 new jobless claims remains well below the 10-year average. The total number of workers on unemployment is also up based on the Labor Department data. With labor demand moderating and inflation fading, the Federal Reserve is widely expected to start cutting interest rates for the first time in 4 years. Fed officials meet next week. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Of course, this morning we got the Producer Price Index for final demand. It increased 0.2% from a month earlier after a downward revision to July's reading. Members of Boeing's largest union are voting today on the first comprehensive labor contract in 16 years. Boeing right now up by 0.4%. Delta expects its full-year profit to be at or above the midpoint of its prior guidance. Delta shares up 0.6%. And Alaska Air Group has boosted its outlook for third-quarter profit on strong summer travel demand. Alaska up by 1.1%. New York City Police Commissioner Edward Caban has resigned after a little more than a year running the biggest American police force amid a federal investigation that led agents searching his home this month. In a message to the police department, Caban said the investigation had become a distraction and that he has made the difficult decision to resign. Recapping, S&P up 8 up 1/10 for on-demand news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Once again, here's your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. You made it to Little Friday, and we do have news to talk about here on the campaign trail as the candidates get on the road. But maybe more importantly today, actual voting begins. The prize goes to Alabama. It's a good thing Rick is with us here. The first state to start mailing ballots to absentee voters. They went out this morning, beating North Carolina. Remember, that was supposed to happen last week, and they got bogged down by a lawsuit from RFK Jr. trying to get off the ballot. Alabama does require voters to have a reason to vote by mail, but this is the beginning of the process. Big stuff Monday when Pennsylvania ships out its ballots. And this, of course, is happening right on the heels of a very important presidential debate that we all watched together this week. We thought some ballots would be in the mail before it happened, but it will inform every vote that is had by mail or delivered in person in November. And it's where we start our conversation with our panel today. The aforementioned Rick Davis is with us, Republican strategist, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and partner at Stone Court Capital. Rick today joined by Kristen Hahn, partner at Rock Solutions, Democratic strategist, and a friend of the program. It's great to see both of you here. Rick, I don't know if you had anything to do with Alabama winning the race here, but can you speak to the strategy that both campaigns are using, realizing it's a bit challenged with Donald Trump's views on early voting to capture as many votes as they can before November?
Sadly, this may be the only thing Alabama is first in the nation on this year, sadly. They've gotten the bug. Not a lot of people in Alabama vote early, but the fact is, they're on the list, and I think nobody would have noticed them this year if North Carolina stayed on track. But the fact that they got delayed by the appeal of Robert Kennedy to get off the ballot there and help Donald Trump a little bit, put them in the chamber. But I would say the big one, the big kahuna in my view, is Pennsylvania next week. They start getting ballots and start voting early. and they had a massive increase in early voting in 2020. And it'll be interesting to see if they can match that 2.5 million early voters. And that could be material to the outcome of the election, both in Pennsylvania and potentially the entire presidency.
Kristen, I know you can speak to the Harris campaign's strategy on this. Democrats have tried to seize on the opportunity, but I'd love to hear from you both as well to remind our viewers and listeners today that this is the reason why we don't know at 11 o'clock at night on election night. A lot of these ballots will not be counted, Kristen, until after polls close.
Yes, and that's also why early voting is so important, and why you see the Harris-Walz campaign doing the swing through, and you'll see them really ramping up their efforts over the next many weeks till the election to get those early votes in and really take advantage of this post-debate bump that the vice president has seen, given her performance and the fact that she, I think, has proven to a lot of people who are looking to see if she could do the job, that she certainly can, and that she can take on somebody like Donald Trump. So I think it's really important to Democrats that we get that early vote out, particularly in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, again, they are mailed on Monday, less than a week after the debate took place in Philadelphia. Interesting moment here, Rick, as the candidates build out their schedules and, of course, try to deploy ads in the right places. When you're talking about early voting, though, isn't that about door knocking? It's about letting people know to begin with that this opportunity is here.
Well, it's both. Advocacy in Pennsylvania has been going on because early in this process, because they have early voting. Campaigns both know that they're going to start next week, and so both the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign have been voting. Have been advertising incredibly heavily. I would say advantage Harris campaign in Pennsylvania. Everything I've seen of a ground game, they have a massive operation of volunteers and paid staffers, and I think last I saw over almost 40 offices statewide. And that is the second component that you mentioned, Joe. Field organization, get out the vote, tracking these ballots that go out and making sure people turn them in is an organizational dimension to campaigns that go unnoticed by most, but are critically important. And I would say in virtually all the swing states, if they haven't already built their field organizations and have their voter ID done and are ready to go as of Monday, then they're probably going to be on defense for the rest of the campaign. And I do know that Republicans used to be pretty good at this, but we've had a lot of infighting at the state level that's going to harm our ability to track these early voters.
Fascinating stuff as we spend time with Rick Davis and Kristen Hahn, knowing all the while that Democrats and Republicans here in Washington, recently backed lawmakers to Capitol Hill, are trying to do what they can to thumb the scale in this election. We've talked a lot about some of the Republican attempts to pass messaging bills on China, for instance, we saw yesterday, but also hold a lot of hearings on the border, on the administration. In the case of Democrats, Kristen, Chuck Schumer has a plan. He wants to bring the IVF bill back, remembering this was killed in the Senate by Republicans, trying to help make this an issue once again, just a couple of days after Donald Trump professed to be the leader on fertilization, as he calls it. Schumer will force Senate Republicans to vote on this while it is an issue that's in the air. Smart politics, Kristen?
Yeah, we call these show votes, quote unquote, in D.C. And there are times when I think these hearings, they don't make much of a difference. I do think, particularly with IVF, it becoming, or has been, one of the main issues that the Democrats have been talking about, and the fact that a lot of the senators, Republican senators, seem to have split with their candidate, Donald Trump, on this issue. He says that he wants IVF to be paid for and be available to people. That vote is going to show a lot of these senators splitting with him. I think Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski were the only Republicans that voted for it before. So in this instance, just coming off the heels of the debate, it was a major, part of that debate, that it will show, maybe a defection. It could have an impact in some of these races and these Senate seats that, I know we're talking a lot about the presidential election, but there are a lot of Senate races out there that are highly contested. I think conventional wisdom is that the Republicans will take control of the Senate, but something like this could have an impact.
Well, Rick, I specifically remember Ted Cruz and Katie Britt, the two senators, Republicans, of course, being right here on Bloomberg TV. They talked to Anne-Marie Hordern about their legislative proposal to codify the availability of IVF treatments. This is something that Republicans have been trying to get their arms around. Does Chuck Schumer present an opportunity to reset the message?
Well, I think it actually, yes, it is an opportunity to reset the message, but it puts people like Ted Cruz and Rick Scott in a very difficult position because they voted against it in that June bill, and they have very tough elections. And now Donald Trump has put the added onus on top of it. And so I'm very curious to see if they walk the plank. These are two guys who can flip their vote and make a difference in the caucus. And I think that they're in the kind of political trouble where you don't want to take anything for granted. I right now, I don't think they lose this election, but it's a lot closer than they want it to be. And this is a key vote, especially in Florida right now, where they have abortion referendum on the agenda for this November, and a lot of suburban women voters mad about the way the Republicans have been handling these issues in the state of Florida.
Kristen Hahn, you spent enough time with Blue Dog Democrats on Capitol Hill to recognize the moment that we are in right now, with 19 days to a funding lapse on Capitol Hill. The first plan by Speaker Johnson to float a 6-month stopgap with the SAVE Act has been shelved. He doesn't have the Republicans or the Democrats, apparently, to make it happen. But we all know there's an election in November, and you don't look worried to me, Kristen. What's going to happen?
Well, I think, first of all, Speaker Johnson needs to come back down to earth and realize that he's going to have to work in a bipartisan way to get the government funded. At the end of the day, government shutdowns do not help the party in power. They don't help anybody, but they really don't help the party in power. And President Trump, insisting that, that they shut the government down, the Republicans in the House, shut the government down over the SAVE Act, really shows that he doesn't really care about the Republicans retaining the House majority. I think the Democrats are in a good position. We're seeing a bump down ballot in these House races with Kamala at the top of the ticket now. So yes, I'm always going to be concerned. I'm never going to not be concerned, but they just need to get the government funded. If I were the Republicans, if I were a moderate Republican in a tough district, I would be in the Speaker's office every day telling him to get it done.
I know where you are on this, Rick, and I think you're looking at the Senate. Chuck Schumer is basically just sitting on a CR that he'll have a vote on and send next door when we're a couple of days out and everyone's running countdown clocks, right?
Yeah, and it's not going to look like this CR, right? There won't be a SAVE Act. It won't go for 6 months. It'll basically be a plain vanilla, get you to the end of the year kind of thing. Lame duck Congress will figure out what to do there. And it's almost like, Johnson has not learned any lessons. This is his third go around to try and do a budget bill. And the idea that he tries to do these show bills when you're dealing with the federal government spending is a kind of a rookie move. He's playing with matches, and he's shocked every time he gets burned. How many times you got to learn this lesson? My guess is this may be his last chance to try and learn this lesson. Win or lose, I have a funny feeling that Republicans in the House are going to be looking for new leadership.
Win or lose, says Rick. We're out of time, Kristen. What do you think? If Republicans lose the House, is Mike Johnson the minority leader?
No.
Okay.
I won't speak for the Republican conference, but I just can't imagine that they would keep him in there if they lose the House.
Great panel. Kristen Hahn, Rick Davis. They'll be back in hour 2 as we welcome our global television audience to the fastest show in politics. Many thanks to both of you. Next hour, we're going to look at the road show and pretty interesting geography that the Trump and Harris campaigns are picking for their travel over the course of the next week. Do you hear Jeter's coming on later? I have to tell you about this. Bloomberg Business Week, the program, of course, that follows this one. Later today here on Bloomberg Radio, Untuckit founder Chris Riccobono and New York Yankees, yes, Hall of Fame shortstop Derek Jeter I love this. Their new partnership, something they'll be talking about with Tim and Carol on Business Week, in a conversation you will only hear on Bloomberg Radio and TV. That, incidentally, is at 2 p.m. East Coast time today. You're just about an hour away from it. So sit back and stay with us right here on Bloomberg.
world of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Jobless claims pick up, so does wholesale inflation. What does it mean for the race? Welcome to the fastest show in politics with fresh data in the air today. Just As the campaigns, Harris and Trump get back on the road. We'll talk about the data with Enda Curran, Bloomberg Global Economy reporter, and dig into politics, not just the trail, but here in Washington with lawmakers back on Capitol Hill. Nicole Austin Hillary, who runs the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, will join us live from their legislative conference underway right now in the nation's capital. Analysis from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist Rick Davis, alongside Kristen Hahn, Democratic strategist from Rock Solutions. And it's all after a look at Wall Street. PPI Day, how's it playing? Charlie Pellet in New York.
Indeed, Joe Matthew, all of a sudden another move higher for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P 500 Index, NASDAQ solidly in the green right now, right to the numbers. We got a rally underway with the S&P up another 25 points today, up 0.5%. Best level of the day with the Dow up 105 now, up by about 0.3%. NASDAQ ripping higher by 123 points. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 0.7%. NASDAQ 100 Index up 0.6%. A broad-based rally with the Russell 2000 up now by 1.1%. 10-year at 3.69%, the 2-year 3.68%. Spot gold advancing $39 the ounce to $25.51, up 1.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 3%, WTI 69.30 a barrel. Members of Boeing's largest union are voting today on the first comprehensive labor agreement in 16 years. Right now we have got Boeing shares advancing by 0.5%. Delta says it expects its full-year profit to be at or above the midpoint of prior guidance. Delta shares are rallying now by 1.3%. Also this morning we had Alaska Air Group boosting its outlook for third quarter profit on strong summer demand and lower than expected fuel costs. Alaska up now by 1.3%. New York Mayor Eric Adams has named a former FBI official as interim police commissioner following Edward Caban's resignation. Caban resigned today a week after it emerged that his phone was seized as part of a federal probe that touched several members of Mayor Adams' inner circle. Again, recapping, U.S. equities are advancing. S&P up 24, up 0.4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Back we go to Washington. Balance of Power continues. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. Interesting to see the turn on Wall Street as we dwell on data once again today. I shouldn't be negative. Some people like what they're seeing here, obviously. But we have a couple of data points that really helps to start filling in the blanks with the conversation that we're having on the campaign trail and what will be the state of the economy, not only when the Fed meets next week, but when the next president moves into the White House. Enda Curran, Bloomberg Global Economy reporter, is with us to look at jobless claims, PPI, both coming together, Enda, in an interesting way today that, well, I guess underscore the idea that things are, in fact, softening.
Yeah, no doubt. Jobless claims rose by 2,000 in the week, up to about 230,000. That says two things, Joe. It says the labour market is continuing to cool. It is moderating. It's not as red hot as it was, say, a year ago. At the same time, though, it doesn't suggest that the jobs market is falling apart either. Yeah. So that's the good news part of the story. That all feeds its way into the idea that the Fed next week will have its opportunity to bring down borrowing costs for the first time in a couple of years. By how much is the big question. And then you also mentioned this morning we had producer prices, like the upstream prices that eventually feed their way into what we pay on Main Street. Producer prices rose a little bit due to services pressure, but nothing that would put the Fed off track for next week. So the producer price story doesn't suggest the inflation story is going in the wrong direction. It all points to a rate cut.
Fascinating. We were spending time yesterday talking about housing costs, which have become a big issue on the campaign trail. Do those stand to potentially rise when interest rates start to fall and the market starts to loosen up, people start bidding up houses again?
Well, this is the big push-pull question when it comes to housing. Right here, right now, the housing market is just jammed tight. People on a low mortgage don't want to sell their home. Young people can't afford to get into it, and rents are continuing to at least stay high, and that's where the inflation pressure is coming from. As you say, both candidates want to break that up. You have former President Donald Trump talking about releasing federal land, offering tax breaks to get houses built. Vice President Kamala Harris has her idea is to build 3 million homes and a $25,000 grant for some home buyers. But there is a scenario, yes, whereby low interest rates, maybe a bit more supply coming on, where there's a lot of demand out there.
Yes.
And it does only add to pressure in the mix already. So it's a fairly tricky one to get right, actually.
People have been locked in place for some time, and they're itching to move in many cases. I've got my eyes on crude oil, something we don't talk about a lot, Enda, but it's a big part of the story here. We're up $2, West Texas, $69 a barrel. It's a 3% increase. And the real story recently has been lack of demand, right? This is an economic indicator, and it really has a story to do with China in many cases, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Look, the oil story, if you step back, at the start of the year with the Red Sea tensions and the blockages on shipping there, people thought oil was going to go through the roof given what was happening in that part of the world. It didn't play out like that. And to your point, it reflects a pretty sluggish global economy, China being the world's biggest oil importer. That's not, their economy isn't going anywhere fast right now. And remember, cheaper energy prices are a big part of the inflation story in the US coming off to boil the way that it is. We had inflation data yesterday showing a big tumble in energy costs. So even though energy prices might be picking up this week, there's still a good energy story, I think, when it comes to the US. And it looks like the world more or less dodged a bullet when it comes to given the tensions that there has been on the high seas this year.
When we start talking about next week's Fed meeting, what are we going to learn in this Q&A that we might not be talking about here? Is Jay Powell going to start speaking more about future cuts, about where we're going to be, for instance, the beginning of next year and further? We're having trouble modeling things right now. Congress is having trouble allocating funds for next year. What will Jay Powell tell us?
I think a lot, listen out for the urgency in his tone. Is he saying we can go by maybe 25 for argument's sake and we have time, let's see how things play out? Or does he suggest that, no, we've got to move in all the meetings ahead of us? So there's a lot in terms of the signaling there, Joe. But also don't forget, as you know well, there's going to be the whole political backdrop. He's on a no-win situation here. If he goes out and cuts rates, he'll be blamed by one side for getting involved in the election. And of course, if he doesn't cut rates, he'll be blamed by the other side. So there's an economic story that we can all break down the numbers, but there's a political story.
There's been a bit of a split here, though, right? Donald Trump is saying, don't you touch interest rates. That'll be seen as political. It's bad for the markets. But you've got a number of prominent Republicans, including Josh Hawley, I think the senator was the most recent, calling for a rate hike now.
Yeah, I've seen that. I mean, on the ground, plenty of businesses and chambers of commerce and people like that are saying they need relief, like a small business group saying we need relief for those who have loans with banks and the rest of it. So there's a big case out there for borrowing costs to come down. But to your point, if borrowing costs come down and then that gets linked to a lift in consumer sentiment, you can see how the Trump campaign wouldn't be especially happy with that.
That's true. It's all going to be about where we are, I guess, in November, although we've noted today, and the first absentee ballot, first mail-in ballots go out today in Alabama. Pennsylvania will mail them out on Monday. So it's really the economy today that people are deciding on.
Yeah, it's extraordinary to think that votes are already being cast, Joe. So there's no doubt about it. I mean, look, right here, right now, inflation has come off the boil and the jobs market is holding up. The Biden administration can claim that. But at the same time, the Trump administration has plenty of issues that they can campaign on too. So the economy is front and center.
Remains issue number one with the help of Enda Curran. Great to see you, Enda. And thank you so much reporting for Bloomberg. Here in Washington, I'm Joe Matthew on Balance of Power with politics in mind. But we want to stick with the intersection of politics and the economy, because you cannot have one without the other. And an important conversation that we can bring you today at an important event that's underway right now in Washington. The Congressional Black Caucus is having its legislative conference just a couple of blocks away from where I'm sitting. And Nicole Austin Hillary is the president and CEO of the CBC Foundation. And she's with us now on Bloomberg TV and radio. Nicole, thank you for joining us. We've been spending time talking about kitchen table stuff, as people like to say, in the world of politics. Prices, the strength of the job market, and the availability of housing. All of these are very important issues for your members and, of course, their constituents. As they say, prices don't have D's or R's attached to them. This is obviously a big issue for people no matter where they live. And Donald Trump is telling a story now that he says is more attractive to black voters, that he did more for black Americans when he was in office than Democrats have been able to do in lifting them up, finding opportunity, increasing wages. How do you see it?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for having us on the show today. Look, the annual legislative conference is 53 years old. This is our 53rd annual conference. And this is an opportunity for all of Black America, and in fact, all of America, to come together and talk about those issues that are most salient to the Black community. And we know that issues that impact the Black community impact all of America. All of those issues right now, economics, closing the black wealth gap, dealing with disparities, housing, all of those issues are the most prescient issues right now for Black America. This is a time for everyday citizens to come to our conference, to stand next to members of Congress, to hear from them in panel discussions, to ask them questions, to stop them in the hallways, to tell them what's going on in their own communities. And that's why we exist. That's why we do this conference, because we believe that every individual person should be empowered to talk about what is happening in their communities and to impact and be empowered by their own communities and by the work that they are doing. So again, as you said, I love that you said this is not about whether you're an R or a D, whether you're purple, green, blue, or yellow. This is about individuals coming together, having an opportunity to hear from their elected officials and having an opportunity to question them, but also make recommendations about what they want to see, the kinds of changes they want to see in their own backyards.
Well, that's a productive conversation, and I'd like to get specific with you about legislative priorities here. But knowing that you were at a watch party, a CBC watch party, looking at that debate on Tuesday, did either candidate bring plans that resonate with Black voters and the people you're talking to today?
Well, I can't speak for all Black voters. The Black community is not monolithic. What I can say is that both candidates spoke to issues that are of concern to the Black community, and again, that are of concern to Americans writ large. They talked about the economy, they talked about immigration, they talked about housing, they talked about education, artificial intelligence, all of those things that to everyday average Americans is going to impact how they live, breathe, eat, sleep, how they take care of their families, how they take care of their communities. I think those were issues that everyone in this country has an obligation to be focused on, has an obligation to be thinking critically about, and has an obligation to then think thoughtfully about as they go into the ballot box in November and make their choices, their personal choices that they think are going to be most beneficial to them and their families.
Well, you just said a lot there, and I find it interesting that we're talking about AI as part of this conversation as well. Maybe AI is part of the kitchen table conversation. Nicole, you tell me, because Washington's trying to get its arms around this technology right now, and there is a civil rights aspect to this, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. And AI is something we're talking about here at the annual legislative conference. We have over 100 sessions, and some of those sessions are specifically looking at AI. The thing that's interesting about AI is, and like all technology, it is often created to ensure a benefit to all of us, but there are often unintended consequences. And particularly when we're talking about technology that can really get into our hearts and homes, that has the ability to survey our movements, and in fact, to help create our thoughts. That's something that we all should be concerned about. And we know that AI is seen in every aspect, in every crucial system of our country, whether we're talking about our monetary system, whether we're talking about our voting system, whether we're talking about how we do our work each and every day. So it's incumbent upon us as the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and the members of the CBC that are leaders here in the country to talk about those issues and to talk about what's going to impact and change how people live each and every day, and how can they ensure that their rights are protected, how can they ensure that their voices are heard, and AI is certainly at the heart of that.
Well, Nicole, this is a big deal to our viewers and listeners, many of whom are investing a good deal of capital in this technology right now and trying to figure out if there will be a regulatory answer to what has been incredibly fast growth here. Will the CBC make this a priority in this Congress?
You'd have to talk to the individual members themselves. The individual members, of course, have their own legislative agendas, and as a body, they have their legislative agenda. Our work with the CBC is to provide policy and research information and to make recommendations about what we are learning, what our fellows and researchers are developing, and that's then for them to assess it and be thoughtful then about the legislative decisions and recommendations they are making. So I would urge you and encourage you, and I'm sure they would want to talk to you about how they are centering AI and how they are dealing with it in terms of how they're responding to and being available to their constituents around that issue.
Well, and I'm glad to say that we're in conversation with many of your members on a regular basis here on Bloomberg, Nicole. Getting a sense of what else is important as we move forward here with the idea that the housing market is driving a lot of the economic challenges for Americans right now. You said something important. You're right. The black voter is not a monolith. But this, again, is an issue that impacts everybody, whether you're a black, white, Latino voter. Cracking the housing market is something that many young voters think is impossible, that they will never realize this. Are any of the proposals on the table that you're hearing about at the conference or on the campaign trail possibly able to unlock that?
Well, I will tell you, I am hearing lots of conversations about, one, centering that as a priority issue, because you're absolutely right. Young people and everyone in between is concerned about how can they afford to put a roof over the heads of their families? How can they buy into the American dream? And we know that home ownership is a way that we pass on generational wealth. And that is something that is particularly important to the Black community, especially since we know, based on data, that it's been very difficult for the Black community to pass on similar levels of wealth, generational wealth to their families. So we are having conversations about that. And one of the things that we're doing is we're listening. This conference is not just about hearing from the elected leaders. It's about creating a space and a forum where voters, where everyday average citizens can be heard. That's something that is rare. When we have a town hall discussion, like we just did this morning, we had a town hall discussion. It was a two-part discussion. First, where we talked about democracy and the issues that are at stake in our democracy. And then we had a second panel on Black wealth and how we close the Black wealth gap. One of the reasons we have a town hall is because a town hall concept is about not only sharing information, but about listening. One of the biggest things that leaders and elected officials can do is listen to what their constituents and community members are saying is important to them, what they're saying about what their needs are and what kinds of changes they want to see. So our conference is unique in that way, and we see that as our obligation. We see it as our obligation to provide a forum for leaders to stand up and speak to the constituents and community members, but we also see it as a place where those community members can stop legislators right here in our hallway. If you were here with me now, you would see there are people milling about all over the Washington Convention Center. You can see members that are going to pass you in the hallway. You have the opportunity to stop them and say, hey, Miss Legislator or Mr. Legislator, here's what I'm concerned about in my community. Here's what I'd like you to do. Or here's a thought that I have about something that we are already engaged in as advocates and grassroots workers in our community. That's the beauty of this conference. And again, I think that's what's going to help us create real movement and change. It's that dance, that delicate dance that has to be done between leaders, not only doing, but also being listeners and being empathetic and thoughtful.
Nicole, I only have a minute left, and I want to tap your expertise on election security. Something important happened yesterday. The January 6th certification of the election has been declared a national special security event. We will have voted by then. How worried are you about security in the next 2 months?
I will tell you, we do work here at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation on voting, and I've spent my career as a civil and human rights lawyer specializing in and working on voting. I will tell you that we have one of the most secure voting systems in this country. There are so many experts around the country, and our research shows that, who work every day to ensure that our systems are working, that they are fair and free, and that they're equitable. And I believe in those systems. I think we all should, and I think we should trust in what those experts are doing and know that they have our best interests at stake. Nicole, keep in touch with us on what you're seeing there.
Nicole Austin Hillary from the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation on Bloomberg.
7:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks edging higher as another faster than estimated inflation reading did little to alter bets on Federal Reserve rate cuts. S&P right now up 27, up 0.5%. PPI Thursday, we've got the Dow up 117, now up by about 0.3%. A NASDAQ higher by 130 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain of 0.7%. 10-year 3.69%, the 2-year 3.67%. Gold up $39 the ounce to $25.50, up 1.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.7%, $69.10 now for a barrel of WTI. Micron Technology shares lower by 3% after BNP Paribas Exane downgraded the chipmaker by 2 notches to underperform from outperform. After the close of trading today, we will be hearing from Adobe. Adobe shares up now by about 0.3%. New York Police Commissioner Edward Caban has resigned after a little more than a year running the biggest American police force amid a federal probe that led to agents searching his home last month. Package delivery company DHL is suing MyPillow, alleging the company, synonymous with its founder, chief pitchman and election denier Mike Lindell, owes nearly $800,000 for unpaid bills. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, as always, keeping tabs on the markets for us here on the fastest show in politics. Thanks for being with us. Kaylee Lyons is off today as we bring you our panel once again with our eyes on the road, like Thelma and Louise, Rick Davis and Kristen Hahn, heading for North Carolina. Well, Kamala Harris is, at least. This will not be a surprise coming off the debate to see where everyone's going. VP Harris, Charlotte and Greensboro today. Tim Walz, Grand Rapids, Michigan. The map's not changing, maybe as much as some would suggest, at least with regard to priorities here. Doug Emhoff, Arizona, Nevada, Florida, the next 2 days. And Donald Trump's hitting the road as well, talking to supporters today. Tucson, Arizona. Yes, another swing state. He'll be in Nevada tomorrow, speaking in Las Vegas. Rick Davis, of course, partner at Stone Court Capital, Republican strategist, and Bloomberg Politics contributor, joined by Kristen Hahn, Democratic strategist from Rock Solutions. Great to see you both here. Kristen, do you like the sound of this road show? We can start with the Harris campaign, because there's been a lot of talk about the Sun Belt, and she is in North Carolina today with NBC News reporting a new batch, 20,000 new volunteers signing up there since the debate. Pretty remarkable numbers as she zeroes in on North Carolina. Tim Walz in Michigan. Is it as simple as this? You keep going to the same 7 states?
I think you have to. And I think she's smart to go to North Carolina. This is a state that wasn't necessarily in play when President Biden was running for re-election. So spending time there is smart. But yes, I think, it's unfortunate, but this race is going to come down to these swing states. And, I think as well as she did during the debate, I think the campaign will tell you that it's still a very, very, very tight race, and really hunkering down in these states, making sure that we have the votes, making sure that the ground game, which has been developed over many, many, many months, is at its peak. Will be essential to winning this election, because I don't think one debate necessarily changes things as far as it's not going to be a landslide, and we need to be in all of these states pretty regularly. And it's great that we have so many people and so many surrogates that can be doing events all at once.
Yeah. Rick, is this the travel discipline that you would be showing, trying to reach the voters in these 7 states?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think now the priority on fundraising, going to places like New York and California where the donors are, is much, much less important than going where the votes are. And in fact, I'm really surprised Donald Trump's going to spend any time in California. You're not there looking for votes. You're there looking for money. And it may be a sign that they're feeling a little bit less competitive financially than they need to be in these states. And so they're going around and pick up some extra cash along the way. But the other thing I think that's really interesting is, there's quite a contingent of Harris surrogates out there that are making good waves in the swing states, and I think it's a real handicap for Trump not to have his wife out there campaigning for him. I mean, she's nowhere to be seen in this campaign from start to finish. She's not raising money for him. Why can't she go to California, let him go to North Carolina or someplace like that? And then they have Vance basically shadowing Harris. We call it bracketing. He goes to the states right before her or right after her. And right now he's shadowing her in these states. And that is more about her strategy than it is about their strategy. So in a campaign where it's all about one person, that works great, maybe, winning primaries and that kind of thing. But you want as many, people out there hammering away in these states as you can for the next 55 days. And it just looks like to me the Trump campaign's getting outgunned.
Well, this is interesting. So I think we've established the rationale, the 7 swing states. So Kristen, Channel 4 in New York says Donald Trump will be holding a rally on Long Island on Wednesday. What's he doing there?
I don't know. And I don't know what J.D. Vance is doing there. Like Rick said, he's there for a few fundraisers. So, it seems like they're a little off. I mean, Trump has said, I think California's in play, which is just ridiculous. On the face of it. So I'm not sure exactly what their campaign strategy is. I can't really speak to it, but I do know that the Harris-Walz campaign knows exactly what they're doing, going around to all these states. And like Walz said, we can sleep when we're dead because there's so much work to be done. I think Trump doesn't think that he has to do the same things that normal candidates have to do. I mean, he said, I don't even have to campaign to win. And I certainly hope that's not true. Because it really is the difference, particularly in states like Pennsylvania. It could be the difference of 10,000 votes or less, and the campaign's on the line. So, maybe he's going to places where he feels comfortable.
I want to get into the campaign apparatus with both of you. And Rick, inside the Trump campaign, the reports that are emerging following the debate in which he said a number of things that the campaign surely did not prepare him to say when we consider the influence of Chris LaCivita, Susan Wiles. He held a war room, as it's being referred to in reporting by Axios, with a number of influencers, so-called, who he has surrounded himself by, including the guy behind Pizzagate, the conspiracy theory, an anti-trans activist I've never heard of, also Laura Loomer, who, of course, joined him at Ground Zero yesterday and believes that 9/11 was an inside job, and spent the last couple of days promoting these ideas that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, were eating people's pets. That actually came out of his mouth, of course, during the debate. You have dealt with challenging candidates, Rick, and I wonder what happens inside a campaign when you've lost the direct control over the message from your candidate.
Yeah, and this is all being facilitated by Donald Trump himself. I mean, what's interesting about this is it's Trump versus his campaign. Normally, the campaign has issues inside direction, strategy, what kind of ads we ought to be, posting up, how much money do we want to put in these states, and that's a healthy, lively debate that sometimes gets bogged down, but otherwise is what every presidential campaign goes through. What's happened with the Trump campaign is he's kind of gone rogue on his own campaign. I mean, the idea of having Laura Loomer on the plane talking to him about topics going into the presidential debate had to have driven Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles crazy. I mean, it's bad enough that Trump won't sit for debate prep, but to have someone chirping in his ear right before he goes on the stage about Haitian immigrants eating dogs and cats, no wonder he talked about it. And by the way, that's his whole MO. It's the last person in his ear, and that's what comes out of his mouth. So, yeah, I mean, it's a real struggle. And at a time when performance matters, right? I mean, the debate performance matters. What he says on the stump now matters. And in addition to where he goes and what kind of events he's having. And so I really do think we've got a rogue situation. We've had it since his speech at the convention where he decided to go off script and do his own thing. And honestly, ever since then, it was kind of the height of his campaign, and it's only been kind of dribbling down from there.
Kristen, even Marjorie Taylor Greene is calling out Laura Loomer on Twitter. It's a pretty ugly tweet that I will not read on the air. That Marjorie Taylor Greene retweeted called appalling and extremely racist, which might give you a sense of where we are on this particular note. Is it the campaign's job? Is it not the campaign's job to protect the candidate from people like this?
I mean, I don't think that they can. I mean, you're looking at Lauren Boebert. I saw that, and it was kind of shocking that somebody like her would go against him. But I think the campaign can only do so much with personalities like that. And I think going back to what we were talking about earlier with the productive surrogates, and that's where the Harris-Walz campaign is really able to cover a lot of these states. The campaign, you've got Trump who's on the stump saying, should I go personal? And everybody says yes. And he goes, great, I'm going to fire all of my campaign consultants. I mean, he clearly doesn't listen to any of them. He doesn't care what they have to say. That's the way it was the first time around. But, if the Democrats can really hit the ground and really put in the work and appeal to these voters in the middle who Trump clearly doesn't think he needs to win the election, then I think that we'll ultimately be successful.
Yeah. Rick, question from a terminal user. What's the Republican counter, if there is one, I will insert here, to Democrats having Taylor Swift pushing 18 to 25-year-olds to vote with an actual link to register in her Instagram story?
Yeah, it's tough stuff. We had a lot of celebrities endorsing Barack Obama when we ran John McCain against him in 2008. And look, I mean, part of what you got to talk about is she's taking upon herself all these, crazy liberal ethics that exist in Hollywood. And she's become the Hollywood candidate. We called Barack Obama a celebrity. We didn't think that was a good thing for him. And so there is a way to push back, and you are defined by the people who endorse you. So everyone thinks, wow, this is a great endorsement, but there are going to be people who don't like, well, maybe not in the Taylor Swift's case, but other endorsements. And so, but like it's a bombshell, hard to deal with, and it's almost like you're wasting your breath even getting into the discussion.
So it's Taylor Swift versus Kid Rock, I guess. Kristen, do we have a battle of the bands?
I don't think there's much of a battle there. I would totally agree with Rick. On the celebrity endorsements, I kind of cringe a little bit every once in a while because Democrats, we've always been painted as like the Hollywood out of touch, candidate. But I think I put the Swifties all in their own space because also, one of the big things Democrats are trying to do is outreach to younger people. And that's something I think she can really help with.
The link is in the post, for crying out loud. Hey, Kristen, it's great to see you. Kristen Hahn, Rock Solutions, Democratic strategist, and of course, Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor, partner at Stone Court Capital. A great conversation, as always. Leon Panetta is coming in next on the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks pushing higher. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ solidly in the green right now. PPI Thursday, and the S&P up 37. Gain right now of 0.7%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 180. That is a gain of 0.4%. While the NASDAQ Composite Index up 164, up by 1%. 10-year at 3.69%. The 2-year 3.66%. Gold up $41 the ounce to $25.53, up 1.7%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil now up 2.7%, $69.14 for a barrel of WTI. Stocks are edging higher as another faster than estimated inflation reading did little to alter bets on Federal Reserve rate cuts. Kroger has lifted its full-year guidance as the grocery store operator benefits from consumers prioritizing spending on groceries and other essentials. Shares of Kroger, they're climbing now by 6.2%. And General Mills has agreed to sell its North American yogurt business, which includes the popular Yoplait brand, for $2.1 billion in cash. General Mills shares, they are down now by roughly 0.5%. New York City Police Commissioner Edward Caban has resigned after little more than a year running the biggest American police force amid a federal investigation that led to agents searching his home this month. And OpenAI and NVIDIA have been discussing AI infrastructure needs with the Biden team. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. Balance of Power continues now. Once again, here he is, your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. Watching Wall Street for us every day here on the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew, indeed. In Washington, Kaylee is off today. It's good to see you. Thanks for being with us on the Thursday edition as we stand by for news on Ukraine. This is important. It will likely happen before we ever get down to a matter of funding the government, as Bloomberg reports a decision on Ukraine's request to use Western-provided, U.S.-provided weapons offensively against Russia is unlikely to come before the UN meeting that we're standing by for in New York, scheduled for September 22 and 23. But President Biden may weigh in on a potential policy shift sooner than that. We've heard from Antony Blinken. We've heard from Ben Cardin. We've heard from Michael McCaul. And it's always an honor to hear from Leon Panetta, who's with us right now on Bloomberg TV and radio. Of course, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, former CIA Director, former White House Chief of Staff, the longest business card in Washington. Mr. Secretary, it's great to see you here. Do you anticipate that we will let our hands off the reins here to allow Ukraine to take the fight to Russia?
Well, I certainly hope we give them a little more room to be able to strike at Russian targets and be able to defend themselves. So I'm hopeful that they can find a way to give Ukraine a little more flexibility to be able to go after those vital targets that are frankly attacking Ukraine without any kind of retaliation. That's got to stop.
Should they be allowed to shoot down MiGs that are taking off in Russia, armed to attack Ukraine?
Well, again, I think it's important to give them the ability to fully defend themselves. If those MiGs are going after targets in Ukraine, then I think they should take steps to be able to defend themselves against that kind of attack. Look, this is a war, and Russia is using everything they have to be able to go after Ukraine. And I think it's our responsibility and the responsibility of our allies to be able to make sure that Ukraine is fully armed, has all of the weapons that are necessary in order to fully defend themselves in this war.
Well, it's something. The air raid sirens we know go off in Kyiv the minute those MiG-31s take off, loaded for bear. Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you watched the debate the other night. There were a lot of questions about what would happen to Ukraine policy if Donald Trump were re-elected. He was asked repeatedly, and we can share this moment of the debate with our audience, whether he even wants Ukraine to win. Here's how it went.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for 250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are.
Mr. Secretary, you can weigh in on what you think a Trump 2.0 might mean for Ukraine, but we hear from a lot of Trump supporters who say, you know what, no new war has started when he was in office and the world was a safer place. How do you respond?
Well, I think that if you're going to be a world leader, you have to stand up to our enemies. You have to stand up to tyrants and to terrorists. And you have to build strong alliances. And that's not what Trump is about. Trump thinks that somehow he can operate alone and cut deals. I mean, the fact that he would not say that Ukraine should be successful at defending their democracy tells you an awful lot about the way he approaches these issues. And it's basically appeasement. It's capitulating to our adversaries. And that's not a way to promote peace in the future. Yeah, it could get you peace in the short term. I mean, he said he can basically cut deals on all of the crises that we are facing right now. Yeah, he could by simply caving in and letting our adversaries get everything they want. You know, that's an approach, frankly, that Neville Chamberlain tried with Hitler in Czechoslovakia. Wow. And in the end, it didn't pay off then, and it won't pay off now. So I would prefer a president that is willing to stand up to our adversaries, build strong alliances, and exercise responsible world leadership. And that's not what Trump does. He didn't do it in his first term, and he wouldn't do it as another president.
Well, you know, he likes to take credit for encouraging, incentivizing European nations to contribute more to NATO, for instance. What would happen to that alliance under a Trump 2.0?
You know, I'm just afraid that deep down, Trump, and he's pretty much said it, is an isolationist. He wants to withdraw from the rest of the world and basically handle things on his own. And my view is that we live in a dangerous world that requires United States world leadership, and it requires our ability to work closely with our allies. That's the key to being able to confront tyrants and terrorists in the world. And so I just worry that what he would try to do is basically weaken our relationship with our allies, try to operate alone. And look, you know, I mean, the record is not that good. I mean, he spent 3 meetings sitting down with Kim Jong-un and didn't get a damn thing. So I'm not that encouraged that he knows how to cut a good deal.
How well do you know Vice President Harris, Mr. Secretary? Her experience has been called into question by her rival in this case. Does she have the confidence to run the United States military?
I think she does. You know, I've known her since she was a prosecuting attorney. I knew her as district attorney and as attorney general. And I find her to be a pragmatic prosecutor, which is not a bad thing to be when you're going to be president of the United States and have to deal with challenges and look at the evidence involved with each of those challenges and crises. So I have a feeling, based on what I saw her do as vice president, meeting with foreign leaders, understanding the crises that are out there, understanding the role that the United States has to play, and most importantly, respecting not just the role of our veterans, which Trump continues to criticize, but understanding the role of our military. The role of our military is to defend us from foreign enemies. It's not to threaten Americans. It's not to round up immigrants into camps. Our military has its first loyalty to the Constitution of the United States, not to the president.
I have to ask you about what's happening in the Middle East before we let you go, Mr. Secretary. There's news that the U.S. is bringing the USS Teddy Roosevelt home. We had a rare moment where 2 carrier strike groups were in the region for fear that Iran would retaliate. Does this tell us that that threat level has diminished so much that we don't need the deterrence any longer?
No, not at all. And my understanding is that the Harry Truman carrier is going to be deployed to that area soon. I think we will continue to have to provide the military protection in that region, particularly if there's no ceasefire. We're going to continue to see missiles thrown at one another. And the United States has got to be prepared to defend against those missiles, particularly in the Red Sea, where the Houthis have continued to go after ships in the Red Sea. So I believe we'll continue to have a strong presence in the Middle East.
Fascinating. I think that's news there. The Harry Truman apparently on its way. Leon Panetta, it's great to see you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you so much for being with us. As always, the insights on Bloomberg TV and radio from the former Secretary of Defense, former Director of the CIA, and former White House Chief of Staff, never mind member of Congress. He's now founder of the Panetta Institute. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we turn our attention back to the campaign trail with the help of Saleha Mosin, of course, the host of the Big Take DC podcast. Nice to see you back at the table here today. We've been talking, Saleha, a lot about the road trips that are coming off the debate. Not a mystery to see the states that both campaigns are going to. It's on to North Carolina today for Kamala Harris. And Donald Trump's headed out west to Arizona. These are the states that will decide the election.
Yeah, absolutely. Regardless of what the result of the debate was, how it made Trump look, how it made Harris look, this is a dead heat election. And you can see that neither candidate is willing to give up the underdog mantle. They're really kind of showing that we're going to put in the grit and the time needed in these key states to win, regardless of when we have a good month with donors and a good month with debates or a bad month.
It's really funny. They do both want to carry that mantle, but in a race so close, they kind of both are underdogs in this case, aren't they? One had the job, the other's in the White House right now, and this is so close that we can't call it.
Yeah, and the money game is also kind of split. Harris has had some really good months. Trump has had some really good months. Right now, the momentum belongs to Harris, but you never know how quickly that could flip.
You're going to be talking, we should note, with Pete Buttigieg a little bit later on today for the podcast that drops today, by the way. This is your pro tip to make sure to download it a little bit later on. Go to Apple, Spotify, wherever, if you're not already subscribed to the Big Take DC podcast. He's a powerful surrogate for the Harris campaign. Is he talking to you as the transportation secretary or as a spokesman for the camp?
Definitely as transportation secretary. I will have questions for him on what consumers are facing with the holiday travel ahead, Boeing, things like that. But hey, you can't expect that reporter isn't going to ask about what could happen in the next 4 years.
And he'll cite the Hatch Act or something. But no, he actually is going to be helping and has been helping Kamala Harris. Having been on the short list, he's known to many as one of the most effective communicators the Democratic Party has. Is that fair?
Absolutely, and he's very proud of going on Fox News frequently and sparring over there. He's out there quite a bit. He's an effective communicator. He's delivered some great speeches as well. He's also known as he's flying about the country. He travels economy when he's traveling as Secretary Buttigieg, and people, his staff were telling me that he'll sit down and then the person next to them will recognize him or kind of feel like they might know him. He'll introduce himself, and then they'll give him direct complaints about airlines right there.
Oh, God, on the flight. That's great. See, I want to listen to this. It's really funny. You hear from a lot of members, as you know, of Congress like that. They got the pin. And the airline always would say, well, I'll give you an upgrade here, but they have to sit in 33E or they're going to hear about it and see themselves in the local paper riding in first class, right? Coming off the debate, big questions about whether there's going to be another, and we don't know right now, but what's your gut say?
I'd be surprised if there was.
What's the motivation for Donald Trump to experience that again?
Well, exactly. There's no motivation. And also for Harris, if you came out so high off the next one, go out on a high.
Right. So that sounds like a no, but we do have a vice presidential debate. It's the 1st of October. Will that have an impact on the race? I mean, typically that's kind of a non-event, but this race is a little different.
This race has felt different. This year has felt different all along. People don't choose based on a vice president.
Even Trump will tell you that.
Yeah, even Trump will tell you that, as he did during the debate. He did not want to talk about J.D. Vance. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting in case anything policy-wise comes out, but it's more of a personality contest, especially at that level.
Podcast drops a couple hours from now. Have a great interview. I'm looking forward to hearing it. Pete Buttigieg on with Saleha Mosin coming up later on today. Here in Washington, the Big Take DC podcast, that does it for us on Balance of Power. You do want to stay right here, though. Do you hear Jeter's coming up? Bloomberg Business Week. Untuckit founder Chris Riccobono. And yes, New York Yankees Hall of Famer Derek Jeter coming up next right here on Bloomberg. I'll meet you on the late edition of Balance of Power. That's 5 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week. It is Thursday, September 12th. I'm Carol Master, along with Tim Stenevec. And folks, we got a rally underway. We are just hovering at our best levels of the session. And Tim, you've got the big caps, the small caps, everything. We're talking about $1.3 trillion added to the S&P 500 this week. So, yeah, we've got kind of some bullish sentiments, definitely, on Wall Street.
Despite another pickup in U.S. inflation. We're going to be talking about that in just a minute, the latest economic drop and what it means for the Fed decision next week. We got Well, who do we have? Bloomberg News International Economics and Policy correspondent Michael McKee joining us in just a few minutes.
Yep, following all of those data points. Hey, we're also going to get into our big take, our Bloomberg big take, which is on Intel's stinging fall from grace. We've talked about the woes over at Intel for a long time, but we're going to get into the particulars and what it does to maybe get on the other side of this.
All right. We also got an all-star chat with Untuckit founder Chris Riccobono. He's back with us, and he brought New York Yankees Hall of Famer Derek Jeter with him. They're joining us in studio in just a few minutes.
He talked about their partnership last time, and he said, I'm going to come back, the two of us, and talk about it. So he's going to be in studio in just a moment. We've got J&J CFO on the future, and then one more thing. Yep, sorry guys, summer is over, and so it's time to talk, holiday travel. We're going to get to
too early
that.
to start booking those tickets, right?
Start now.
All right, all that and more over the next hour on Bloomberg Business Week. First up, a check on the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie.
All right, thank you very much. Happy Thursday, PPI Thursday to you both. Lots going on, lots of moving parts. Right to the numbers. We got a rally underway now with the S&P 500 index up 45, 55, 98 where we stand on the S&P, up by about 0.8%. The Dow up 195, up now by about 0.5%. And NASDAQ is advancing 198 points, up 1.1%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, cannot ignore that today. That index up now by 1.6%. 10-year yield 3.69% with the 2-year 3.66%. Spot gold up $41 the ounce to $25.52, up 1.6%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 2.7%, $69.11 for a barrel of WTI. Boeing shares up 1%. Members of Boeing's largest union vote today on the first comprehensive labor contract in 16 years, setting the stage for a disruptive strike just as the embattled Playmaker works to recover from a series of manufacturing missteps. Delta Airlines expects its full-year profit to be at or above the midpoint of its prior guidance. We've got Delta up now by 1.1%. Alaska Air Group boosting its outlook for third quarter profit on strong summer demand. Alaska up 2.4%. And of course, a whole lot more on the airlines coming up this afternoon on Bloomberg Business Week. New York City Police Commissioner Edward Caban has resigned after a little more than a year running the biggest American police force amid a federal investigation that led to agents searching his home this month. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, folks, you know this. Another slightly hotter inflation print, which, of course, the Fed watches, and a read on the U.S. labor market that showed some weakness, which we know the U.S. Central Bank is increasingly focused on. So let's get to our economic roundup.
Now that we're just less than a week out from the next Fed decision, back with us, we got Bloomberg News International economic and policy correspondent Michael McKee. He's here in our Bloomberg Business Week studio. So, Mike, a slightly hotter inflation print, a slightly higher jobless claim. Does that slightly mean some trouble?
We just had to make life more interesting for you guys.
That's
we
what
just
we
came
want,
in and
right?
said no. No, it doesn't mean that there's any trouble here. Basically, what we're seeing with the PPI and CPI are slightly higher numbers. With the PPI today, it was services inflation, and within services inflation, it was what they call trade services, which is the margins for retailers and wholesalers. And they were up 0.6% after a drop last month, so it suggests that profits are doing okay so far this quarter.
Because they can hold on to the margins, right? Yeah. And profitability.
And so that is what pushed up the overall PPI. So it's really not a terrible situation. Some of the things in the CPI that went up, like airfares, were down in PPI. So it doesn't suggest that we have an inflation problem, but it does give the Fed reason to do 25 and say our issues are not over yet.
CPI, PPI, obviously consumer price index versus producer price index. What's the difference between these two and what they reveal about overall inflation? Like, how do you put the pie together, the inflation pie?
Well, the easiest way to describe the difference between them is the CPI is what you pay and the PPI is what the companies charge. And that's the difference between the two of them for the most part. And the issue with CPI versus PPI, people look at the PPI and say, oh, well, it went up or down, and that's going to affect the CPI. But there's a lot of middlemen between the producers and the consumers, and everybody has a markup. So it's hard to draw a direct parallel between the two.
And sometimes people make choices, right, in terms of the middlemen, not to pass along to consumers.
Yeah, it depends on what their situation is.
Or increasingly direct to consumer, bypassing middle people?
Well, there's always going to be sort of middle people because when you're looking at PPI, you're looking at, in many cases, raw materials. Well, somebody's got to turn the metal into steel and the cows into hamburgers and stuff like that.
Why'd you have to go there?
Ouch.
All right, let's just...
Sorry for all you vegetarians out there.
Hamburgers grow on
Look
trees.
away, look away.
Hamburgers are growing trees.
Hey, listen, is this it? Because I feel like since before Jackson Hole, before the last Fed meeting, we have just been counting down to next week's Fed meeting. And we had a bunch of economic reports between Jackson Hole, right, and next week's Fed meeting. So is this it in terms of data points that the Fed really cares about?
Yeah, we get the Michigan confidence numbers tomorrow. There's no reason to think that confidence has fallen off a cliff. It'd be interesting to see if there's any reflection of the debate in there, but probably not because it was shortly before they closed the survey. But then we look at the inflation expectations numbers, and while they can move, they don't move very much at a time. And the New York Fed does its own survey, and they didn't move very much in that earlier this week. So there's probably nothing else that's going to influence the Fed.
Mike, we don't know what's going to happen next week. A lot of people think they know what's going to happen next week with the Fed. But I want to talk about something after next week and what the rate cut path looks like for the remainder of the year. What's the smart question to be asking about the Fed's rate cut path between now and the end of 2024?
Well, it's important for markets, obviously, to know what the path is, and because you're trying to discount future earnings, so you're trying to figure out what it is. And then for planning purposes, if you're a business and you're considering investments or expansion or something like that, or if you're just an ordinary citizen who's thinking about buying a house or a car, where do you think interest rates are going is going to be a question that will define when you do whatever you're going to do. And we've seen mortgage rates come down, but mortgage applications have not gone up because people are looking at this and going, well, they're going to go down further. So why do I want to, settle for a high rate? So that's the question that people are going to want to know is where do we go from here and how fast do we get there?
Hey, I'm glad you went into housing. Forgive me, I'm just going to read this because this was part of a Bloomberg story. Bloomberg News Morning Consult tracking poll of the 7 states finds that voters consistently say the economy is their top priority in the upcoming election. We know that. When asked in August which economic factors carry the most weight at the ballot box, swing state voters selected housing costs more often than unemployment, pay raises, or interest rates. As an economist, because this is something that comes up with the candidates, how do you explain the lack of housing, in particular affordable housing, which I feel like we have been talking about as a problem for years? Is it something a candidate or a president can cure, or is it a case of builders wanting to build more homes and get the permits that are needed to do it?
Well, there, you just put your finger on it. The problem is at the local level, zoning at the local level. It's something, zoning's gotten much tighter over the decades. It's much harder for builders to acquire land. Land is much more expensive, and it just keeps pushing people farther out, and then you build up a suburb, and then people don't want anybody else to come in. So that's an ongoing problem, and it's really not an issue that a president or to a certain extent a Congress can solve. The one thing that has been suggested is you create incentives for cities to loosen their zoning rules.
Yeah.
Get some federal aid kind of programs going. I want to say, bless her heart, Kamala Harris, with the $25,000, that's not going to help.
Yeah, we spoke to Stefan Seelig about this yesterday.
That's not going to help because that would stimulate demand, and it's supply that is the problem.
Right, and demand would just, even more demand than we've got already, would just shoot up prices.
Just a reminder, when this is put to voters, oftentimes at the local level, at the ballot box, oftentimes those homeowners push back on the idea of creating zoning with more density, Mike, and that's a real challenge for bringing the price of housing down.
It's always the NIMBY question, and it's hard to get people to go YIMBY on it.
Yes, indeed, in my backyard. I love that. Good stuff. What?
I love it when Mike's in our backyard.
I know. In our studio?
Yeah.
Michael McKee, thank you as always. Bloomberg News International Economics and Policy Correspondent. All right, that's today's economic data that you got to know about. Let's get to one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg about a really important company in our world.
It's about the slow motion disaster at one of those most important companies in the modern tech industry. It's reaching a pivotal moment this week. So writes Ian King, a Bloomberg News U.S. semiconductor and networking reporter in today's Bloomberg Big Take, which you can read on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com/Big Take.
Yeah, Ian, they're out speaking of property issues, San Francisco. He's there in our San Francisco bureau. Ian, I got to say, first of all, great story. We've been talking with you about the decline for Intel. I feel like more than a year, more than 2 years. It's been a while. We talk about this a lot. It feels like though it's coming to a head as you report. Tell us about the meetings that have been going on with Intel's board this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be precise about our understanding of these meetings. These meetings that are going on are board meetings. They're not the kind of barbarians at the gate, we're going to throw the management out type meetings yet, but they are considering basically what Intel should be doing, what perhaps it shouldn't be doing in order to kind of marshal resources to continue to try to fund this expansive plan that they have going forward. Clearly, its business operations are not able to do that right now. As we saw with its recent earnings release, things were considerably worse than I think a lot of people had expected, including the management. And so really what this meeting is doing is trying to sort of get that track back on plan rather than potentially throw it out the window.
So Ian, give us some context here about just how precarious Intel's finances are right now. Help us understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple. They are trying to spend an enormous amount of money at a time when they do not have that money coming in from their operations, right? That what they were good at and what they are still quite good at isn't paying like it used to. They have $50 billion in debt. They're losing money, they have negative cash flow, and they need to spend and continue to spend over a number of years on projects that probably won't pay off for a number of years. It's a very difficult situation to be in.
Yeah, kind of amazing that this is what we're talking about in conjunction with Intel. Hey, another stark metric is the share price. It was once nearly a $75 a share stock. It's now below 20 a share. It's down more than 60% year to date. 90% gain, though, last year. It got above $50 a share, so that's a big swing in about a year or so. What are the ongoing disappointments? What are the hopes and possible pivots of this company that keeps it going for, I don't know, years to come?
Yeah, I mean, the share price, I think, has contributed to a lot of the speculation that we're seeing about, you know, where the company goes and who might be interested and is it affordable as a purchase, blah, blah. There's a lot of that going on outside of Intel. But to answer your question more directly, they need a win. They need a big customer for their foundry, or their outsourced chip-making effort that they're trying to get off the ground. They need some of these products that have been absolute dominant to return towards that, to stop losing market share. They need this massive AI spend that we're seeing to look in their direction. Right now, that's just not the case.
In the U.S. government, part of the story in recent years as well, with the Biden administration, you know, the idea is that they're going to give billions of dollars to Intel. Help us understand the position of the U.S. government and where they stand in this.
Yeah, two aspects to that, and I think that's a very germane question. All of the scenarios that are being floated outside of Intel about where it might be going or who might buy it or how it might be split up, the U.S. government regards Intel as a strategic asset, that its technology is fundamentally important to this country. So all of those scenarios, and they are just scenarios at this point, would have to go through Washington, and Washington is going to take a very, very critical look at those. So that adds a layer of complication, takes away from the standard Wall Street playbook in a lot of respects. And the other side of that is, you mentioned the money that we are paying as taxpayers for Intel. It's not enough, right? It's helpful. It cuts out some of the differential in terms of what it costs Intel's overseas competitors to put plants in the ground, and hopefully makes it, you know, a level playing field. But it doesn't. It's not a bailout. It's not the kind of money that Intel needs. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars a year over multiple years just to play in this game.
Hey, Ian, one thing I wonder in your story, you take, you know, a look back at what happened to Intel and why we got to this point, why we're having this conversation with you today, why you wrote this story today. Having said that, you also note in your story that it didn't have to come to this. Is there anything Intel can learn by looking backward in terms of where it needs to go forward?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's why Pat Gelsinger was brought in. That was a step backwards. He left Intel to become the VMware CEO at the height of its powers. His plan was to do what Intel's good at: lead in manufacturing, have products that just are so good that people have to pay through the nose for them. That's his plan. That requires a lot of money. So that's what he's tried to go back to. But things have moved on since then. Competitors like TSMC, like NVIDIA, are now very strong, have the kind of dominance, have the kind of clout that Intel used to have. So he's trying to, he's trying to play the greatest hits at a time when music tastes have moved on.
One thing I do wonder, if AI, if a year and a half ago, Microsoft didn't do, their investment in OpenAI and ChatGPT, if that hadn't happened, and I know it's not a good way to do this, but if it hadn't happened, would you have written this story about Intel being at kind of a critical juncture? Would we not be having this conversation? Is it just AI, or it's something much more systemic and in the Intel culture that has just kind of brought about its problems?
I would say that's a very good question, and it's a mixture of the two. Right? The AI opportunity has, in shareholders' minds, in technologists' minds, concentrated just how important and useful technology other than Intel's is, right? And this was an opportunity that Intel should have taken and would have given it more time, would have given it more resources to be able to devote to putting some of these other things right. So it's a mixture of the two. It's definitely an accelerant, but it's not the root cause. The root cause are decisions that were made by Pat Gelsinger's predecessors, decisions that have turned out to have been terrible decisions, and indeed that's how he's characterized them.
It's hard to ask you a question, Ian, about what things look like in the future, but help us imagine a scenario. Is there one where a storied company like Intel just doesn't exist in a few years?
I mean, the conversations that I've been having with people who look at the company, who have invested in the company, some of them who don't invest in the company, that is what it's come to. It's the oh dear moment, shall we say. And even for that to be even a vague consideration around a company that just ruled the world like Intel did is frankly shocking. You got to remember, I think the perfect illustration of that is 2021 wasn't that long ago. They had 3 times as much total revenue as NVIDIA, and look where we are now.
That's an incredible decline, right, when you think about their business. Ian, as always, great stuff, and I know we continue to talk about this company, and we'll continue to see what the next chapter brings when it comes to Intel. All right, so appreciate it. Ian King, thank you. U.S. Semiconductor and Networking Reporter at Bloomberg News out there in our San Francisco bureau. By the way, this is among the most read stories on the Bloomberg, and it is the Bloomberg Big Take, which you can check out on the Bloomberg terminal and at bloomberg.com/Big Take.
The shares of Intel down about 0.8% as we speak, 0.7%. The NASDAQ Composite, though, up 1%. The S&P 500 up 0.7%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 0.4%.
All right, we're just going to say it. We're kind of excited about our next duo. Coming up next, the founder of Untuckit, Chris Riccobono, and New York Yankees Hall of Famer, shortstop, of course, we're talking about Derek Jeter. He's going to join us. The two of them together teaming up a partnership when it comes to athletic wear. We're going to get the details on that partnership. That's coming up next.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Charlie Pellet. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing, looking at a 0.7% gain right now on the S&P. Up 40 points, the S&P at 55.95. The Dow pushing higher, very close to session highs, up 161 now, up 0.4%. NASDAQ up 1.1%, with the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, the outperformer, up now by 1.4%. 10-year 3.68%, the 2-year 3.65%. Spot gold ripping higher by 41 points, 25.53 the ounce, up 1.7%. Big day for crude, West Texas Intermediate up 2.5%, 69 even a barrel. Brent crude, the global benchmark, back above 72, 72.01 for a barrel of Brent, up now by 2%. Again, recapping, S&P up by 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, let me throw out one metric. I guess I kind of got to do this. The global sportswear market size valued at nearly $413 billion in 2022, estimated to reach nearly $749 billion by 2031. And listen, there's a lot of players in it, and looking to take a share of it is a partnership by our next two guests, both with brands that are very well known, now with a combined brand known as Greatness Wins.
So let's get to the interview. With Moore joining us here in the studio, the founder of Untuckit, who came up with the idea for his casual shirts while working at GE Healthcare. Chris Riccobono back with us. Also with us, Hall of Fame shortstop and 5-time World Series champion with the New York Yankees. Also an e-commerce investor too, Derek Jeter, both here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. Okay, guys, first up, we want to know how you guys got together. How did this come together? Who called who? Who had the idea for who to get involved? How did it come about?
That's a good question. You start. We'll see what version comes out. Go ahead.
I was going to say Derek reached out to me, but that's not how it worked. So over the pandemic, I was looking to solve another problem in the fashion industry, and I thought about athletic apparel. And it didn't exist for me, something that had a great fit, but also had performance first in mind. So I came up with this concept and this idea, but now I wanted a few athletes behind me. And at the time, I think Derek might have still had a contract with Nike or it was winding down, and I didn't think that I could get to him or that he'd be interested. But after a year of bothering him and his agents, he actually called me and said, "Chris, I'm just not that interested and excited in this." But I said, he can't get off the phone, Derek. How can I get you excited? So we talked for a while after that, and we kind of came together with both of our visions. You know, I'm the apparel guy. That's the way I think about it. Derek's was a successful entrepreneur, but also very successful as, you know, a Nike guy.
Yeah.
So I knew that he had a lot of insight that I didn't have, and he shared it with me, and we launched the brand about a year and a half ago, and we're having great success.
Okay, you weren't excited, and then you became excited. How'd that happen? How'd you make that turn?
Well, I think, you know, first and foremost, getting to know Chris, we talked about the idea. I've had relationships with athletic brands throughout my career, and great relationships, and I still do today.
Right.
And, you know, when I was first speaking to Chris, I was like, well, first of all, you know, this is a crowded space. It's not as easy to attack this space, and it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of energy. And I wouldn't say I wasn't excited, but when I do something, I'm all in. And if I'm not all in, I'm just not going to do it. And at that point, when we were having the discussion, I said, you know, I don't think now is the time. And then we actually got together. We had a chance to look and feel and touch the product, and that started getting me very, very excited about it. So I guess that's the best way to put it in our short period of time.
You do, though, Derek, probably get a lot of investment pitches, not just in the apparel world, but no question, from lots of different entrepreneurs who want your involvement. What was it specifically about this one with Chris, with Untuckit, that really caught your eye?
I think you got to get to know the people, any business that you're in. It's the same thing when you're on a team, on the field. You have to have the right people on your side.
Or a co-anchor.
Exactly. I was going to say that, but you didn't give me enough time to say it. And, you know, I just found Chris to be very, very passionate about it. You can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't. And, you know, even when I told him that I wasn't interested, he kept calling, and we kept having the conversation. And I knew if you're going to be successful, you need those types of people on your side.
I always think about that. I remember talking to a top M&A banker, and he's like, the only way you get deals done is the CEOs have to like each other, and that's how you get things come to the table. Would you say no to a great deal because you didn't like somebody?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, you end up working a lot. It's funny. When Derek said that he wanted to be more involved, and when he goes all in, I was thinking he was just doing that as an equity play to get some more equity.
Yeah.
Not that he actually wanted to be. And Derek's like that. I mean, he wants to talk about everything, every decision.
And you want somebody who's really
I want
involved.
someone that, yes, because I don't know everything, and I definitely don't know everything in the athletic apparel space. So it's been a really...
This is recorded, right? I'm going to play that back to him when we do. We're going to play that back.
You can do that. You can loop it. You can loop it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the same thing for you. I mean, Derek, when you get involved in something, how, we asked about what made this interesting, but in general, how involved do you want to be? I mean, how much do you have to love the brand that you hook up with?
You have to be involved. I mean, otherwise you're just giving your money and you're hoping someone else runs with it and makes you more. But
yeah.
When you're passionate about something, when you put in the time, you put in the effort. I think the best thing to say about us is we disagree probably more than we agree. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want people that always think the same as you. Otherwise, you're never going to make improvements. You're never going to make progress.
Is it hard to say no to Derek, though? We just talked with a leadership, we're an author of a leadership book, and they talked about CEOs who, once they get to the top, they surround themselves with people who don't say no.
Listen, I rolled the dice right from the beginning, and we went after each other a little bit. But like you said, it's the best way to go about it. Like, you want to leave at the end of the day and have people go against your views